Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, and of course, my favorite new name, the existential Mr. Rogers. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want you all to know that I did not come up with these names, and of course, it is cookie time for the dogs, and that's what time it is, right, buddies? Yes, and everybody likes the dogs, right? Okay, Gilly, that's cookie time for you, bud. Now you got to get down. Good boy. Good boy. Get down. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, this, of course, is Robservations. I am Robert Meyer Burnett. This is Robservations number 232. And my God, I just got out of the shower. I'm dripping wet. I apologize. I'm dripping wet. But at least I'm clean, and I've got Tom Ford Black Orchid cologne on, my favorite cologne. I hope it works for you. Can you tell? But yes, I don't know. I was running late, hence the 5 minutes lateness on the hour. There is so much to discuss today. It is a veritable potpourri of nerd subjects of all kinds of different things to talk about. I didn't know what to do, so I just picked everything that was on my mind, and I figured I'd throw it all out there. Well, I'm not going to belabor this first point because every other YouTuber in the world. I mean, between the Bob Iger revelations in his book, and now, of course, the news yesterday that Kevin Feige wants to make a Star Wars movie, which, by the way, is no surprise to anyone. As we've talked about a lot in this business, fandom and the upper echelons of Hollywood do not mix. Never the two shall meet, except in one man. And that's Kevin Feige. Look, anybody can pay lip service to being a fan. Kevin Feige is a fan. He started out as a fan. He worked his way up, I've always said, on 13 different Marvel-based movies before creating the MCU with Iron Man in 2008. So it's only been a matter of time, I would think. As John Campea pointed out on his show today, which I was not on because I'm not on Thursdays, Kevin Feige doesn't really have any more mountains to climb when it comes to the MCU. After the 23 MCU Infinity War saga films, where do you go from there? I mean, of course, I think the only thing that he could have perhaps done that he didn't do was win an Oscar for Best Picture, but that's asking a lot. Alfred Hitchcock never won an actual Academy Award for Best Director, even though he made 53 features. Neither did Stanley Kubrick ever win an award for Best Director. They got honorary awards, but they didn't get those. They didn't get those things. And if Kevin Feige, I think he's got a lot of time left in his career, he still has time. But making a Star Wars movie, like, why not? Remember, he is a creative producer. He's a very active producer. So he's not necessarily usurping Kathleen Kennedy's control over Lucasfilm. It would be a team up. And, Kathleen Kennedy expects, as she always has since she produced E.T. with Steven Spielberg back in 1982, she expects to work with visionary people that do their jobs. What Kathleen Kennedy was not used to was having people that were visionary not do their jobs. And that's sort of where I think the trouble she ran into started. But anyway, it's pretty incredible. My feelings on the whole Kevin Feige situation is, hey, amazing. What I really want Kevin Feige to do is take over Star Trek or all of Paramount. I know Jim Giannopoulos is, of course, the president of Paramount. Paramount is in a state of flux. They've got the Mission Impossible films. They have Gemini Man, and they've got Terminator Dark Fate coming out, which is once again Skydance trying to make good on their investment in the Terminator franchise. We will see if that happens. I'm pulling for Terminator Dark Fate. I really am. As everything else, I want it to be great. Why wouldn't you want a Terminator movie to be great? I just think that the actual concept has not advanced very far from where it began 35 years ago with James Cameron's original Terminator in 1984. It's just variations on a theme. Now, I know that there's no Skynet. There's like Legion or whatever the hell the new thing is called. I don't know. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't seen it. I'm not going to judge it. I'm kind of excited by what I have seen. But again, I haven't seen anything that's vastly different from what we've seen before. And I think the Terminator franchise definitely is in need of some kind of reimagining or some kind of leap forward in its mythology. We shall see. But I'm pulling for Terminator Dark Fate. Who isn't? Don't we all want to see Terminator be cool? I do. I want to see it be cool. But so anyway, my whole thing about Kevin Feige is, I'm not going to belabor this point. I think it's great. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what he comes up with. I think Kevin Feige, the best thing about Kevin Feige is he's a very active producer that works synergistically with his filmmakers, which, by the way, is the way a producer should work with their filmmakers. That's why I'm a big believer in less producer credits on movies. I understand that is the reality of getting movies financed these days. But unless you are actively involved, and you know what? I understand producers find the money, executive producers find the money, but giving away producer credits willy-nilly does nothing for anybody unless you truly are a active, creative producer. And I think Kevin Feige is one of the best that we have ever seen in the business, certainly since I've been alive. I didn't really get to watch David O. Selznick, at least from afar, do his thing. But, Kevin Feige has always impressed. So I think it's great that he's taken over the franchise. It's going to be really interesting to see what he does. The fact that, by all reports, he talked to a very well-known actor about a certain specific part he wanted that actor to play. As a fan, I'm thinking, man, I'd love to see Grand Admiral Thrawn. That'd be cool. But I just, the Star Wars universe, I don't know if he's going to go back. I don't know if he's going to go forward. My Gundam model just fell over, which was very scary because Gabe was playing with it when we were not on camera yesterday. Because who doesn't want to play with 1/60th scale, perfect grade Gundam models? I know I do most of the time. So anyway, good on Kevin Feige. Very excited. I'm not going to speculate as to what he's going to do. He's still busy with the Marvel Universe. I don't think he's going to necessarily take over Lucasfilm. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. I don't know. I think, as John pointed out, that's sort of a lateral move. I'd love to see Kevin Feige come into a place that's sort of in a state of disarray and put it back together, like the Star Trek franchise. But again, there's that would be a Herculean task, and I think there's a lot of stuff that would have to go on before that is possible. But as far as imagination connoisseur news goes, and you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, it's good news for all of us. You know what else is good news for all of us? That these chats are sponsored by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you want to try one of their great products, as I highly recommend you do because I love them, go to their website at getluckytiger.com and you can buy anything there. And you, when you check out, use the letters PGS for Post-Geek Singularity and you get 20% off your order. And it should be known that if you've used that code once, you can still go back and use it as many times as you want. And it's still, in fact, good. Tallulah is outside barking. I can't do anything about that right now. Anyway, as I dab my face off yet again, boy, there's a lot to talk about. And the first thing I want to talk about right off the top is there's a guy named John E. Price. Never met him personally, but I really like him. He does he's getting his PhD, and he writes a lot about different area than Willow Yang works in. He is not any way, shape, or form dealing with the natural sciences, but he does deal in geek subject matter. And he wrote a pretty cool article that he published yesterday on Medium called Dear Pop Culture, Grow Up. And I'm just going to read a little bit of this article. Sadly, we live in the 21st century, post-reality TV, post-internet, and post-truth. Not only does everyone dream of becoming a part of pop culture, we have the tools and free Wi-Fi to impose ourselves at will. Americans today don't dream of going to the moon or even learning how to moonwalk. We dream of going viral, a rhetorical damnation if there ever was one. The result of the collective unwashed simultaneously seeking personal celebrity is only amplified by the nullification of international borders. The volume of glory seekers and the magnitude of the potential reaction have increased exponentially, unfathomably. Severed adrift from tangible stimuli, self-worth is now conceived in virtuality. Binary relationships fill our lives, friend or unfriend, follow or unfollow. And so this thing we call pop culture has morphed not just in structure, but in substance. Celebrities still reign, but mundanes are now celebrities. Fame is still sought, but fame is siloed into clicks and ratios and GIFs, or as he writes, GIFs. In the wake of this shift has been the great infantilization of American society. Faced with immense technological leaps, seemingly endless sources of pop art and entertainment, and the ubiquitous tools of global communication, we have regressed into a cacophony of petulant voices clawing and gnashing at each other in a constant quest to get the last word, to have the most likes, to win all the internet points, and reassure ourselves that it was all worth it. Well, John, I really appreciate you writing about me. Thank you. No, I'm just kidding. Pop culture, well, though there's some truth in that. Pop culture right now is drowned in a sea of puerile bullies, endlessly fighting, crying, and shitting themselves over who has the right to play with the newest shiny toy. Millions of grubby hands grab out at once, smashing into each other senselessly. Mine! The enveloping chorus of shouts, gatekeeper and social justice warrior and toxic, echo back on top of each other until the very sound itself is indistinguishable from the churn of the Leviathan. Long since shed of its cherubic cover, pop culture is stuck in a state of relentless regression, borne back ceaselessly into the future. I love that. Well, anyway, I won't read more of that, but you can kind of see where it's going. It's a very interesting article. It's quite a long article. It's called Dear Pop Culture, Grow Up. It's by John E. Price, and I recommend everybody give it a whirl. I like John. I think he's a good man. He writes really interesting things. So check it out. Now, let's see. Which do I address first? I think I'm going to address here's something that has recently happened that isn't necessarily movie or television related, but it's something that I am greatly distressed over, very disappointed by. I've said this before on this show, but I get just as excited about books as I do about movies and television, because to me, they're just books are a different medium for storytelling. And as far as genre literature is concerned, I sort of, my love of cinema was growing at the same time as my love of reading was. I've told the story before. When I was 10 years old in the 4th grade, I joined the science fiction book club. I joined the science fiction book club not necessarily because of Star Wars, but because my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Walton, started reading John Christopher's The Tripods trilogy, The White Mountains, The City of Gold and Lead, and The Pool of Fire, to our class after our recess. When I was in elementary school, we had 2 recesses. We had a 15-minute recess in the morning, and then we had the long 30-minute recess after lunch. And that was a big deal. And then after lunch, it was sort of, it wasn't really you put your heads down on your desks for a while, but you could if you wanted to, but the teacher would read. And I'd read books. I've been a fan of books I'd always read since I was a little kid. My dad used to read the James Blish Star Trek episode adaptations to me. So I liked reading already. But when I was 10 years old, my 4th grade teacher started reading The White Mountains and the Tripods trilogy. The White Mountains is the first book. And I couldn't take it. I couldn't sit there. It took so long for her to read. She would only get through like 10 pages. I'm like, I have to know what happened. So for my birthday, I don't know, I was actually for the holidays, my Aunt Barbara, who always bought me books, bought me the 3 books, and I tore through them way before Mrs. Walton even finished reading The White Mountains. And that was it, man. I was off to the races. I joined the science fiction book club. My parents, they were happy that, I mean, they would foot the bill. You get like, I could get like, 3 or 4 books for a couple of bucks, because that's how the science fiction book club worked. Even though they were book club editions, and even back then I knew they weren't legit full-blown hardcovers. It was better than a paperback, and they looked better on the shelf. So I was a total fiend, and then I started reading a lot of canonical sci-fi. I also developed relationships with science fiction authors, at least in my own mind. I didn't know any. But they became very important to me. And as I grew up, the only autographs that I collected religiously or regularly were authors. I love getting books signed that I love. Now, in the 80s, when I was in high school and college, I was devouring books, and genre fiction was great. Horror, I loved horror novels, and of course, the mid '80s were this sort of zenith of splatterpunk. You know, you had, even though Stephen King was in his cocaine phase, you had Clive Barker hitting the scene with the Books of Blood. And one of my favorite things, I read a lot of science fiction short stories and horror short stories, and there were great magazines. Like, I had subscribed to Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine, but the Twilight Zone magazine was one of my favorites because there was a lot of genre fiction in the Twilight Zone magazine, and that was the first time I encountered what later became, or one of my favorite authors to this day, as I'm speaking to you now. One of my favorite authors of all time is Dan Simmons. And the first piece that I ever read by Dan Simmons was actually in the Twilight Zone magazine, and it was a story called The River Styx Runs Upstream. And I love Dan Simmons. Harlan Ellison, I guess Harlan Ellison was teaching a writing course, I think, in Colorado, if memory serves, and discovered Dan Simmons there. And Dan Simmons' first novel was a horror novel called Song of Kali that was set in Calcutta, of all places. Another, I don't know if it was his second novel, but Carrion Comfort, like carrion, what a crow would eat. Carrion Comfort, epic horror novel. I mean, it took me forever to read. It was very dense reading, but it went right up there with The Stand or Robert McCammon's Swan Song or Skip Inspector's The Scream. Carrion Comfort became one of my favorite horror novels of all time. It's still, I've got a first signed edition of it, the Dark Harvest limited edition hardcover that Dan Simmons signed for me, actually. And I was able to meet Dan Simmons on numerous occasions and have him sign books for me. And in 1989, Hyperion, the first of his Hyperion cantos, came out. They weren't the Hyperion cantos then. It was just Hyperion, which I later found out was only half of the book that he had written. Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion were all written as one book, and it was split into two by his publisher. I think it was Bantam. Told him to cut it in half. And one of the greatest science fiction novels I ever read. Hyperion won the Hugo Award that year. Well, Dan Simmons let me down. And I have to say that over the years, and Adam Troy Castro, another author I greatly admire and really like, who I follow on Facebook, he pointed this out. He was writing about this. I found out about this on his page, about this controversy. But he pointed out that a lot of the people that have disappointed me most, more than actors, more than film people, anybody, have been authors. I'm not saying all authors. I have a lot of friends. One author friend of mine who I've known for years and years and years. I adore him. He knows I adore him. But authors, especially science fiction authors, have disappointed me when I've actually met them firsthand. Now, there's some authors that were just as delightful as you might imagine. People have found on my Facebook page that there's a picture of me and Melinda Snodgrass and George R.R. Martin sitting at the VIP section of a party at Comic-Con a number of years ago. He was delightful. And I'd been reading George R.R. Martin since the early 80s, when I read his Vampires on the Mississippi novel Fever Dream, I think 15 years before the first Game of Thrones came out in 86 or 96. And so there are authors that are delightful. But for the most part, I found people that I was surprised by. Authors are the most surprising. Well, Dan Simmons, who I've met a couple of times. I mean, when I say met, I went to book signings where he signed my books and we had a few words. I didn't get to like bro down with him. But Dan Simmons, who's now 71 years old, is being criticized online, pilloried online, for remarks he made about Greta Thunberg. And Greta Thunberg was, of course, the 16-year-old Swedish girl who was at the UN and gave a fiery diatribe about climate change and her future and all of these things. There's been as many op-eds and memes and all of that written about her in the last couple of days as there has been about Bob Iger revealing that George Lucas was disappointed in his Star Wars, in Disney Star Wars. But Dan Simmons' Facebook comment, he wrote this on Facebook, mocking teenage environmental activist Greta Thunberg, who recently spoke at the UN Dan Simmons took it down. However, screen caps were shared, and many science fiction writers and fans have tweeted their dismay. Simmons is a World Horror Grandmaster and past winner of the Hugo for Hyperion, the World Fantasy Award, the Bram Stoker Award, the British Fantasy Author, and the Theodore Sturgeon Memorial Award. For those of you who might not be familiar with his books, The Terror, of which season 2 is airing now with George Takei. The Terror, the first season of The Terror, is based on his wonderful novel of the same name. Bradley Cooper and Todd Phillips of current Joker fame, Bradley Cooper and Todd Phillips were announced as developing Hyperion, one of my favorite science fiction novels, back in 2015 as an event series for the Sci-Fi Channel. Where that is now, I have no idea, but boy, would I like to see that, because it would be epic. Hyperion was once described as the Canterbury Tales in space. But let me read to you what one of my heroes wrote about 16-year-old Greta Thunberg. This is from Dan Simmons' Facebook post. In case you were frozen in an iceberg next to Captain America this past week and missed it, a 16-year-old Swedish climate activist, one Greta Thunberg, the unbelievably bratty child of 2 Swedish theater performers, lectured, insulted, scolded, and threatened all adults in the world at the UN's Climate Action Summit in New York. Knowing almost nothing, a sin for which we usually forgive 16-year-olds, and parroting every single thing she's heard by equally know-nothing adults who shout about the existential crisis and looming doom of climate change without knowing a shred of the actual science, Miss Thunberg made fists, showed ferocious frowns, and spewed adolescent spittle as she shouted. You all come to us, young people, for hope. How dare you? You've stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. And as if this were too understated for her audience, little Greta threw in another, how dare you, followed by a pregnant pause, and then another louder, how dare you? Far left-leaning adults, as if that phrase is not too oxymoronic. This is what he wrote. Especially those in the media absolutely love this browbeating and genuflected to this kid with every vocabulary of praise they could muster. Never mind that little Greta behaved like an absolute brat and knows nothing about climate or climate change or science or, for that matter, basic manners. She shamed all adults everywhere, and that is the essence and aim of almost all far-left rhetoric. I was in elementary school for 18 years and worked as a resource teacher with all ages of children. But for 10 years, I taught 6th grade. I loved it. Children are a gift to the world, and I know firsthand how delightful some can be. But I also know that as far as facts, knowledge, and any true understanding of the world and how it works go, kids, including 16-year-old adolescents, important, I'm going to come right back to this, are just on the beginning of a long, long road to figuring things out. Greta Thunberg's unearned arrogance, insolence, and all-around bad manners should earn her not the admiration of a sycophantic world, but an hour or two of time out corner where she can think about just how limited her actual knowledge base is and how inappropriate her pretentious behavior has been. This is a man who I've spent probably thousands of dollars on limited edition, small press, first edition copies of his work. I've read, I think, everything he's written. Short stories, books. I even bought one story from, I think it's Lord John Press, called Entropy's Bed at Midnight. Great story, by the way. In this very small, limited run version book. I love Dan Simmons, and reading this to me was rather shocking. Now, if you take the Wayback Machine to the mid-1960s, America instated a military draft during the Vietnam War. What was the age where you could be drafted? It was 17. I don't know how close Miss Thunberg is to 17, but in this country, 50 years ago, we conscripted our young people that were only 17 years old and sent them across the world to fight in Vietnam. Fight and die. Over 50,000 men died in that war. And we talk these days about how, oh, military buildups, you never know when people are going to go to Syria. How far are we away from another draft? And I just kept thinking, I wonder what the United States would be like if tomorrow they instated a draft. And by the way, with our inclusive society now, it would be both men and women. It would be all young people from 17 to 21 or maybe even older that, you know, selective service would suddenly start calling up. What would be an outcry then? Now, that's just to go to war. What was Greta really talking about? She was railing, living in a Scandinavian country, about climate change. The Scandinavian countries are seeing evidence of climate change before other countries are seeing evidence of climate change. And I think that, yes, she was a firebrand. Was she being used by the far left? Well, I don't necessarily think I would couch it that way. But I would say that what was she really railing against? Climate change, making sure the biosphere, the closed biosphere of this planet was protected. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And if we have one 16-year-old kid talking about climate change at the UN, is that such a bad thing? Does that 16-year-old girl have to be mercilessly mocked by adults? I mean, I would say, okay, if Malia or whatever, who came, the same girl who couldn't go to school and suffered acid attacks back in Afghanistan, she's okay. But a girl who's talking about climate change isn't. We live in a strange world. And I'm looking at a man whose writings I have always admired. He wrote one of my favorite books I've ever read called Phases of Gravity, which is basically about a fictional astronaut who went to the moon, and now he comes back down to Earth, and he's dealing with his family, and he realizes the most important thing that he's ever done is behind him. And how do you as a man reconcile that with the rest of your life? How do you lead a good life? It's a great book, and when people talk about Dan Simmons' work, no one ever mentions Phases of Gravity. I have a very beautiful slipcase first edition of that. Although, to be honest, I think it's a British UK edition because I don't think it was ever released in any kind of a slipcased edition here in the United States, but I have it. And reading these comments from a teacher, a former teacher, no less, about, and I've seen a lot of this. I've seen a lot of my favorite science fiction writers, as they get older, they become they're firebrands, they become libertarians if they weren't already. They're drifting over to the right, and there's a lot of far left rhetoric. And I am no fan of the far left, let me tell you. I thought they were on my side, but I know for a fact, if anyone's going to be coming from me, it's going to be people on what I would have considered my side of the aisle. But anyway, it was a little disconcerting. And you know, if that's what she wants to do, what's wrong? Let's like David Hogue, who lived through had friends lost in a mass shooting at his school, becomes a firebrand about gun control and advocacy for perhaps a little bit of checks and balances as far as guns go, and he becomes vilified as well. It's a very strange world that we're living in. I think it's quite odd. But anyway, you know, I was reading an article in Vox, and I know Vox. Look, I zip around the internet. I read articles all over the place. But this was an article that is from September 26, 2019, and its title is "Melting Permafrost in the Arctic is Unlocking Diseases and Warping the Landscape." Now, I'm not going to get into it because this is not a show about climate change or climate science, but Brian Resnick wrote this article, and it's all about permafrost and what's actually happening with the permafrost in the upper above the United States, say up by the Arctic Circle and around the Arctic Circle and below into even Scandinavian countries, and what's happening to permafrost and how it can affect the planet. Now, this isn't even necessarily about climate change. This is just a symptom of what climate change can cause. And I would encourage all of you to go read this article. Melting permafrost in the Arctic is unlocking diseases and warping the landscape. And it is not a doom and gloom necessarily, a doom and gloom article. It's just presenting the facts. But I was very disappointed to see Dan Simmons come out and say this, because I will tell you right away, I'm always under the false impression, I guess, that authors that I love are way smarter than I am. I have this unbelievable admiration for anybody who has written a novel. I've fantasized about writing a novel. I don't know if I have it in me. My good friend Bill Hunt, not only has he written his first novel, which he's now just starting to take out to look for a publisher, Only Those Who Risk, a Space Guard novel, a terrific novel. If you like The Expanse and things like that, you will like his novel. I hope it gets placed. I admire the hell out of him. He's already outlined a series of books based in the same universe, but he's written, it's terrific. But Dan Simmons, who's given me so many hours of pleasure to read him going out after a 16-year-old girl on that was only, like, at the end of the day, however much of a firebrand she is, people have talked about her being autistic. I don't know if she is autistic. What does that matter? All she was doing was coming out and saying, why don't we take a long, hard look at where our planet is at as our own administration keeps rescinding environmental protections? I just don't understand. Like, why not err on the side of caution? You know, because one guy might have had a shoe bomb, we now take our shoes off when we go through security at the airport. Is that such a bad thing? Our healthcare system, I know, is not big on preventative medicine, but shouldn't it be? Anyway, very disappointed in my man Dan Simmons to have read that. And then, you know, it isn't as egregious as some of my other favorite people's crimes necessarily, but it makes you wonder, does that mean their work is invalid? I don't think so. I'm not going to ever look at Dan Simmons' monumental achievement of the Hyperion Cantos, whether it's Hyperion, Fall of Hyperion, Endymion, or The Rise of Endymion. I will never look back at those books and say, you know, those books affected me greatly. I thought they were staggeringly monumental achievements in sci-fi literature. Those books are some of my favorite of all time. And Dan Simmons did write them. The first one came out 30 years ago. People change. I get it. As you move through life and you have to pay lots of taxes as you make more money and you see injustices, I think you become more curmudgeonly. There's a reason why there's that whole idea of get off my lawn. But it's still disappointing. My man Stephen King has yet to disappoint me. You know, and I mean, I'm not saying that I haven't read books of his that I thought were like, short stories that didn't do it for me. But for the most part, Stephen King has continued to provide enjoyment both between his printed pages or in his printed pages between two covers, and also whenever I've seen him in real life. And, you know, he's got a new Netflix movie, In the Tall Grass, which I can't wait to see, that he came up with based on a novella with his son, Joe Hill. So that's exciting. But my man Dan Simmons, I don't understand. Why, bruh? Why, bruh? You've been so good. You've been so good to me for 30 years. So I read this and I'm like, did she say anything so bad? I mean, how many dystopian books have been written about ecological collapse? I didn't know anything about climate change. I mean, you go back and you read some of the most classic science fiction. John Christopher, didn't he write the book that No Blade of Grass was based on? Look at one of the great science fiction dystopian movies from the early 70s, Douglas Trumbull's Silent Running. You know what it's about? You know what Silent Running is about? If you haven't seen Silent Running, this movie came out in the early 70s. It is about the fact that all of the forests on the earth have died except the forests that they have preserved in giant spaceships in domes in these spacefaring craft that are to protect and nurture the last remaining forests that exist. I know it's kind of a silly premise, but when I was a kid, man, this movie meant a lot to me. This was 1971. It has a theme song by Joan Baez. I mean, it doesn't get more ecologically conscious than Joan Baez singing your theme song. So it's not like ecological collapse, climate change, the planet heating up has not been a staple of science fiction for decades, and there's a reason why. Anyway, Dan, buddy, I love you, but why go after a 16-year-old girl who is just being a firebrand? Because long after you're gone, assuming she lives to be as old as you are now, she's probably going to spend a good 50 years dealing with the results of our short-sightedness. I'd be pissed too. Anyway, yes. So just thought I would read those things. And I got more to talk about, by the way. I'm just going to break it up. People have been firing in some chats. Let's get to that. Jordy54 says, what is Netflix's marketing strategy? I acted too late to have 2 films included, including Marriage Song, into the Hamburg Film Fest. What is going on? Thoughts? Jordy54, I don't know about Netflix. They acted too late to have 2 films included, including Marriage Song, into the Hamburg. Right. That would be right. Marriage Song. I see you're saying that Netflix has these 2 movies that were at the Toronto Film Festival. One of them being, I think you meant Noah Baumbach's new movie. Look, I don't understand. Here's the thing about Netflix. Netflix, they don't even want to put their movies in theaters. They have reluctantly bowed to pressure from filmmakers and critics and the media at large. How can you not put movies like Martin Scorsese's 3.5-hour The Irishman into theaters? Well, that's not what Netflix was designed to do, first of all. And the fact that they're not putting their movies into theaters or entering them into film festivals is not surprising to me. That's not what they're doing. I mean, the fact that they've been sort of cinema shamed to put like, hey, we're going to get to see El Camino in the theaters. I'm going to go see both El Camino and The Irishman in the theater. I'm just glad we get to see them there. And let's face it, the theatrical windows of movies now is shrunk 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. You'll see these movies on streaming services. Netflix is paying money. And by all reports, The Irishman is by far their largest investment into anything. God knows what the final price on that movie is, using all of that de-aging technology. So Netflix, look, they're under no obligation. It bums me out that you can't see movies like The Irishman and El Camino in the theaters, part of the course, but we're not going to. So any chance. And by the way, every time Netflix releases a movie in the theaters, they don't get the kind of response that even warrants them doing it. I expect we'll see them do it a few more times because the filmmakers, Scorsese, could say, hey, man, got to put this movie in the theater. He was able to get it in the theaters. I'm sure Vince Gilligan, with Breaking Bad and being what it is culturally, they'll put it in the theaters. But you know what? I'm willing to bet you $1 million that they will not get the kind of theatrical play that they need to say this was totally unjustified. So ultimately, Netflix is going to eventually not put their movies in film festivals. I mean, unless they want to go after Oscars, which, I don't know if necessarily even that's something that they want to do. Just to have, they might do it. I'm sure The Irishman is definitely in contention for an Oscar, obviously sight unseen, but they don't need to do it. It's not part of their business model at all. JB Bonifacio says, the Hollywood Reporter article mentions Feige has a major actor in mind for a specific part. My best guess, Sebastian Stan as a post-Return of the Jedi, pre-The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker. That's interesting, JB. Although I don't know if, since they're closing out the Skywalker saga, I don't know if Feige would do that. Maybe he would. I would probably bet not. But you don't know. I don't know. Although that is a very intriguing suggestion. I think that would be a strange thing, though, especially after this. The Skywalker saga is going to be done, and after what they saw happen with Solo, I don't know if anyone's going to buy anyone else playing Luke Skywalker other than Mark Hamill. I don't know. Emil Johansson says, "Can the color of a soul be yellow?" Well, according to some people, you're yellow. Yeah, probably. They probably can be. I don't know if a soul has a color. Color is also based on the way we perceive the world. So I would assume that colors are not constrained by the physical world, so I don't know if they would have colors. But if they do, I could definitely see souls being yellow, depending on what kind of person it is. Cosmic Doctor says, hey, Rob, any idea where I can get a CD with all the music from the 60s Spider-Man cartoon? I love it. A Canadian band covered it once, but I cannot find it. Cosmic Doctor, I do not know, but there are a lot of Film Score Month. Go to Film Score Monthly. I think it's still on the web. You can look into their forums. There's got to be people out there that can help you. And if it exists in some way, shape, or form, let me tell you, there are people out there that have it. If there's one thing I can tell you without fail, or I can tell you 100%, that if there's something to do with film music that you want that is obtainable in some way, shape, or form, somebody has it. You just have to know who that person might be, or somebody that knows that person. If it's out there, they'll know. And let me get to some letters. I have so many letters to read. And the first comes from, and not just because he's a moderator, it comes from Terry Flynn, the Sheriff of Nottingham himself, wrote me a great letter, and I'm going to share it with you. He's not just a moderator, ladies and gentlemen, and he doesn't just live in Nottingham. He's also a great letter writer. Greetings, Rob, from the pseudo Sheriff of Nottingham. I'm inspired to write this following your comments regarding the lack of engagement with film scores. Hoping if I make the mathematics as user-friendly as Willow has made her microbiology to you, it might help shed some light on this issue. Spinal Tap's Nigel Tufnell famously remarked that D minor is the saddest key to play in. So, harking back to another recent discussion, would the 20th Century Fox fanfare in B-flat major elicit a different emotional response if played in a different key? Whilst modern tuning is meant to mean the key doesn't matter, in fact, it does. John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, and Alan Silvestri have known this instinctively and perhaps mathematically. Our emotional reaction to scenes in a movie can be manipulated by the choice of key the composer uses. This is one of those cases where a little bit of knowledge can be worse than none. Pianists without mathematical training will instinctively say, I'm wrong about choice of key. Modern pianos are tuned to what is called equal temperament. The number of hertz as you move up the scale is multiplied by a fixed number, so that the note A above middle C, 440 hertz, is exactly half that of A one octave up at 880 hertz. Equal temperament requires a computer to tune intermediate notes correctly, but Johann Sebastian Bach famously realized the principle and without the maths used his incredible ear to tune keyboard instruments intuitively to this. The bottom line is, if you play the Star Wars main theme in D, G, C, or any other key, it should not elicit any different response in you. But in fact, it does. Why is this? Well, the mathematics is hard, but fascinating. Back in 1990, the final year of secondary school, I did a project in further mathematics class in preparation for going to Cambridge, showing that the notes G sharp and A flat on a piano should be two different keys. An alien with 40 or 50 fingers would play a huge piano that had both keys. Us humans must simply deal with 10 digits and use a highly restricted piano that must take an average of 2 of the notes. Crucially, you simply cannot average in a way that gets everything right. The averages of 2 consecutive notes on a piano are all wrong, but some are just more wrong than others. This is what leads to the phenomenon that playing the same piece in one key sounds more right to the human ear, and in a different key, a little less right. It's why science fiction marches in major keys all typically cluster into 2 or 3 keys when there are 12 to choose from. It's amazing how few YouTube videos deal with this, let alone correctly. And even Wikipedia notes that its sections on temperament tuning in music are vastly undersourced and underexplained. I had virtually nothing to go on in 1990, and my dad did empirical research independently of me, which bore out my conclusions and which others have replicated since. Thus, in the recent interview with John Williams that you linked to on Twitter, I flinched when I saw him referring to noticing the major third of F sharp in the key of D being flat. Although I know he knows this, I suspect advanced age and the pressures of an interview caused him to refer to one of the most infamous cases in music of where it can be acceptable, indeed sound correct, to flatten the third. If a hypothetical dinner party with the late Goldsmith and Silvestri had been listening to a piece with this third, they might think it pitch perfect. But Williams, upon entering the room late and mid-theme, might find its sound totally flat. Totally flat. It's our ear, the mathematical tuning, and crucially, the wider context of the music is what makes the difference. Williams indeed admitted he doesn't listen to his scores in their entirety. Personally, although I rate him above all Hollywood composers, I think that is bad practice, and many musicologists would agree. This issue sounds incredibly esoteric and irrelevant, but it is analogous to the fights that erupt over just what definition you should watch a movie in. Due to a weird eye prescription, I had to avoid 3D movies at all costs. Furthermore, 4K is pretty much lost on me and a waste of money, no matter the screen size and viewing distance. I don't think that would be true if you're watching in 4K HDR. Dolby Vision. Furthermore, in the last 5 years or so, we've learned that any movie critic watching most movies on a large, say, 100-plus high-def TV at a short distance, as opposed to at the cinema, is in fact inducing artificial and irreversible myopia unless they go away and look at the horizon for 5 minutes in every hour. The clinical trial data are in, and my PhD means I know how to read them. It was part of my job to understand how to read and understand this stuff. This explains a hitherto observed but ill-understood phenomenon. Why is the average degree of short-sightedness among developed Asian countries deteriorating so fast? Now we know. If there's a more general moral to all of this, it is the following. The audio and visual influences of movies are heavily distorted due to marketing. Those with over 20/20 vision can obtain some additional benefits 95% of us won't. Likewise, those of us like me who learned 2 instruments to concert level and studied math to a high level can appreciate additional issues in film score, though the latter is something that people, even without training, can pick up on instinctively if hearing a theme repeatedly, like in franchise movies. The archetypical example was The Force Awakens. Lots of people noticed that the opening theme sounded somehow different. They had actually spotted that the LSO had been ditched by Disney. The LSO has a distinctive sound with decades of continuity. The newly appointed principal trumpeter in 1976 and 77 found that they were about to start concentrating on film scores, with the first being some weird movie called Star Wars. He was still in position for Revenge of the Sith and is a legend. This kind of thing, I didn't know that. This kind of thing matters, as does the tone of orchestras. I noticed a step up in quality in Endgame compared to Infinity War without needing to see we had the LSO, the London Symphony Orchestra. I should have said that. There is a reason that something like 12 to 13 of the Best Score Academy Awards from 77 onwards were for scores that used the London Symphony Orchestra. That record is unprecedented. I could wax lyrical about much more, including the cheats that string instruments in part-time studio orchestras used by Disney and other studios use, and which the London Symphony Orchestra frowns upon. But I bet part of your brain spotted it in Endgame versus Infinity War, even if you couldn't put your finger on what is different. It is a subtle but so emotionally important part of the movie-watching experience. Fully appreciating the complete visual and audio experience in many movies in one viewing is now impossible. I saw Endgame 3 times at the cinema, and the limitations on human consciousness meant I had to concentrate on different audio cues, etc. each time. It's the same with video. There are reasons for watching in the best definition you can perceive, but seeing and better appreciating everything in a glance, which some video gamers claim on YouTube, is definitely not a valid one. One final, perhaps depressing thought. Yoda said, "You must unlearn what you have learned." Unfortunately, if you study video and or audio issues, this is impossible. You'll never get me to like Avatar. I hate it visually, and I loathe it musically on so many levels, mainly because of James Horner, who wrote 2 good scores then. Well, look him up. His reputation is not exactly as a Williams or a Goldsmith. Sorry. Kind regards, Terry. Well, Terry, that is easily one of the most interesting and insightful letters anyone has ever sent to this Robservation show, the Post-Geek Singularity. Really good stuff. Thank you for that. Uh-oh. Somebody's coming through the door. I think it might be Elizabeth. You just never know. But she's quieting down the dogs. I guess she's here, which is good because the dogs sometimes need to be quieted down. Alan Sachs is asking, what is better? Netflix has no marketing for El Camino, or CBS fuels over a year and rumors and speculation and trailers for the Picard series? Well, interesting, Alan. I would say that obviously Picard has no, as we knew, or as we talked about yesterday on the John Campy show, as we didn't know, the Breaking Bad movie over the summer was like a rumor. Nobody even knew if it was indeed getting made. Nobody would say anything about it. Nobody would admit that it was actually happening. I remember reading rumors before it was even a thing, and the way it came out, it really, even now, I don't think even people that have loved Breaking Bad have any idea that there's a Breaking Bad movie coming out, unless you're an imagination connoisseur part of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Why would you? I mean, that's the really interesting part. And what Netflix did, I still don't understand. I mean, like I said before, In the Tall Grass, In the Shadow of the Moon, Fractured, which I've been reading bad reviews of, which bums me out because it looked good. Speaking of Avatar, Sam Worthington is in Fractured. And then, of course, the Breaking Bad movie had no marketing until literally until they're upon us. So there's no anticipation. And I don't think marketing is even a part of Netflix goal. They just throw their stuff out. I mean, Criminal, which we watched the final UK, there's 3 episodes of Criminal UK. Criminal is one of the most intriguing television shows on the air, at least for me in a production standpoint. I want to know whose idea was that? How did it come about? If you haven't seen Criminal, check it out. It's basically, they had one set, and that set was made up of 2 rooms and an exterior hallway. And it's a series, it's an anthology series with 12 different episodes, 3 episodes in 4 different countries. There's Criminal UK, Criminal France, Criminal Germany, and Criminal Spain. And every episode is literally in a police interrogation room with the police interrogating somebody, and you understand the story as the interrogation unfolds. And it's amazing. And they don't even make any bones about the fact that the room and the set looks exactly the same in every country, you know. And I'm intrigued by how this got made. I want to know who developed this show. Did they decide to do this from the get-go, or did they decide to do it as, oh, we're going to build this set, and they decided to do, say, Criminal in whatever country, and then somebody had the brilliant idea of like, why don't we do this in 4 different languages? Brilliant idea. I would have been marketing the hell out of it. Nope. They just dumped it on Netflix. There was, of course, a trailer for it that was a little bit intriguing, but I don't think Netflix they don't even care about marketing their shows. I don't know why. But I think, to answer your question, I think it is better. There's a lot more anticipation of the Picard series because there's just more awareness about it. Now they're talking about season 2 of Picard already, and we haven't even seen season 1. They haven't even, at least to my knowledge, we don't even have a debut, a date for when Picard's going to air. We know that there's going to be a Picard countdown comic series, which means, of course, it's obviously in the continuity that Alex Kurtzman and Bob Orsi came up with for Star Trek 09, emulating its Countdown Picard. There was already the Countdown miniseries that Picard was in. So, yes, it is in all of that continuity. It is the bad robot continuity of Star Trek, whatever that means. Brandon Valenzuela says 4K is unbelievable on the right TV or the right projector. Fight me, bro. You're absolutely right. 4K HDR, Dolby Vision, or HDR 10 plus. Dolby Vision is better than 10 plus. As I learned by somebody asking me that question on the show. Incredible. And if you get these new 4K remasters, when they actually go back and go to the original negative elements and remaster a film, whether it's 2001, whether it's Apocalypse Now, whether it's The Matrix, whether it's Die Hard. Die Hard always has looked shitty, even on Blu-ray, until this 4K disc. That's why I so desperately want a 4K version of Basic Instinct, because Jan de Bont's cinematography, which is heavily filtered and it has always looked gauzy, not the 4K disc. For the very first time, Jan de Bont's late 80s cinematography was preserved in all of its glory. So 4K truly is the realization of a childhood dream I've had since I was 13 in 1980, where I was like, you know what? I really wish I could replicate the cinema-going experience at home. Well, now with 4K, you can. You absolutely can, especially when you have the right transfer. I mean, when they go back and they do things like The Matrix in 2001, oh my God. And people are like, well, how much better can The Matrix look? That much better. Some of these 4K transfers are just astonishing. Don't Look Now. I received the 4K version of Don't Look Now. The 4K version of Casino, stunning. Matatouine says, is it Matatouine? It's not Tatooine. It's Matouine. It's Matouine. Matouine says, really enjoy hearing your take on all things geek, especially your thoughts on the fallout between Lucas and Iger over Star Wars. I think you were spot on. Keep up the great work. Well, Matouine, I want to thank you, first of all, for the generous contribution to the channel. I very much appreciate that. But also what keeps me going is kind words like yourself. I like when people chime in. I'd like to think that I bring, other than a lot of YouTube pundits, I'm not saying that not all YouTube pundits are incapable, but being that I do have ties to the entertainment industry and have for the last 30 years, I'd like to hope that I apply that knowledge, at least rudimentarily, is that a word? That I do have something to say that's different than other YouTube pundits. Dean Miketich. I think I got it right. Dean is here again. Dean wrote a letter. Dear Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity, I just watched Sunday's show where you read my letter on who owns a franchise, the fan or the rights owners. I mentioned in that letter that there is roughly 32,375 hours of Star Trek up to 2005. You were quite right to say that was a bit much. I got the math wrong. Oops. It's actually roughly 549.25 hours. 549.25 hours or 32,955 minutes of Star Trek. That is calculated that each episode is 45 minutes long and the 10 movies are 2 hours long. I know TOS ran for a little longer and the TNG era was more like 42 minutes and the animated series was 25 minutes, but I'm not that much of a geek to work out the actual time, though I would love it if it was 32,375 hours, laugh out loud. I would also like to reassure the Post-Geek Singularity and newcomers to your channel that I take no offense that you get my surname wrong and happy that it became a running joke. I am also honored that Willow Yang came to my defense. Willow, if you're coming to the side of the pond for the Bond get-together or coming over sometime, I would like to buy you a drink. Yeah, I think get in line. What member of the Post-Geek Singularity community doesn't want to buy Willow a drink? For those that are interested, my surname is pronounced Miketich. Damn it, now I can't ever mispronounce it again. Miketich. Regards, Dean Miketich. Dean M. Well, Dean, thanks for writing in. It's always great to have you write in. Now, there's something else I haven't weighed in on. And I got to talk about it. The Joker controversy. For those of you who don't know, there's a little bit of hullabaloo because the United States military, and I've got it here, the United States military actually issued a warning in Fort Bell, Oklahoma, warning their troops about there was chatter on the dark web about what they call incels. Incel chatter talking about making the Joker film, a movie that, by the way, very few people have seen so far, and certainly people in the incel community I don't think have. But they're threatening to go shoot up movie theaters. What the Joker movie has to do with being an incel? I mean, I understand. I get where they're coming from, but why you would want to shoot up? What is not being able to get laid have to do with wanting to shoot up a theater? I'm not going to get into all those things. I understand it, but I want to talk about this because this is where we're at as a society. So the Department of the Army, from, I guess, the 107th Military Police Detachment from Fort Bell, Oklahoma, writes, this was on the 23rd of September, Crime Awareness Prevention Action. There's a case number. It says, memorandum for record. The Fort Sill CID office received an intelligence bulletin regarding a credible potential mass shooting to occur at an unknown movie theater during the release of the new Joker movie scheduled on October 4th, 2019. The intelligence bulletin was published by Travis County, Texas Sheriff's Office, and working with the local FBI field office, say they have discovered disturbing and very specific chatter in the dark web regarding the targeting of an unknown movie theater during the Joker release. This notice is to have the widest dissemination to the FSOK community as a potential threat within the AOR. Commanders need to be aware of this threat for soldier and family safety and to increase situational awareness should they choose to attend the release of this movie at a local theater. You know, I read this kind of thing and I just think, you know, I'm trying to be Mr. Positivity, but I'm like, this is where we're at. You know, we're getting a movie, we're getting a Joker film where they've actually been able to transcend the comic book genre and give us, which by all accounts is a pretty extraordinary version of the Joker's origin, that Todd Phillips and company and Joaquin Phoenix put so much of themselves into this movie that Warner Brothers was able to finance it under the guise of making a comic book movie, that we now have to worry that people are threatening to go shoot up movie theaters. I mean, to me, this is an actual military intelligence briefing. And I read this and I'm like, wow. Of course, Gizmodo reported on this. And I just think to myself, I'm so, this kind of thing just hurts my soul. It really, really reminds me just how far, I mean, you know, whether you're a science fiction writer yelling at a girl that all she is advocating is that why don't we not pollute our planet as much? I mean, that's basically all she's saying. She's talking about climate change. Sure, she's one voice. One 16-year-old girl on a planet of billions of people stands up at the UN and screams and yells about her future. Well, if anybody should be screaming and yelling about her future, why shouldn't it be her? Well, on the other end of the spectrum, we've got idiots on the dark web, self-professed incels on incel forums, talking about shooting up people in a movie theater seeing the Joker. First of all, I would think anybody who's a fan of science fiction, fantasy, horror, comic books, any imagination connoisseur should actually be overjoyed that a comic book character is getting the kind of treatment and the kind of release that Warner Brothers, as a major motion picture studio, has allowed. This is a marvel. See what I did there? This is a marvel that we've even had this been allowed, that we're getting this kind of a film. Joker is a homicidal maniac. You know, this idea that they're showing how he was forged by the society in which he lived in. You know, Howard the Duck, the comic, which I dearly adore, the tagline for the Howard the Duck comic was "Trapped in a world he'd never made." And that's, there you go. That's the Joker. And the fact that immediately a group of people that the very idea behind, actually, you know what? I was curious about, I mean, I'd read this before, but I was like, okay, the Incel Movement, of course, Elliot Rodger, who shot up the UCSB and then killed himself. What a coward. He wrote, of course, this manifesto. I mean, it is the whole thing is, but I was like, incel, what is, so I looked up where's a good, this article comes from Peter Baker from March 1st, 2016. And you know, I got this Elle magazine, not exactly my bill of fare. It's not what I usually read, but it's from Elle magazine. Since beginning research into the incel universe, I'd hoped to find the first online incel. Which corner of the manosphere had it hailed from? How the concept spread. More than once, I thought I'd found the source of it all, but the trail kept going cold until, after 4 months of looking, I found her. I was trying to create a movement that was open to anybody and everybody, says Alana, now a 43-year-old management consultant and artist from Toronto. In 1993, she was finishing an undergraduate degree in statistics at Carleton University in Ottawa, and she'd never had sex or anything close to a boyfriend. Sometimes she blamed her appearance. Short, slightly overweight, eczema splotches. Often she felt like she'd passed through adolescence without learning the unspoken rules of a complex game that everybody else understood intuitively. At Carleton, she had access to the internet for the first time. I was supposed to be doing statistical programming, she said, grinning, but I was reading about sexuality quietly. Moved by powerful accounts of people who realized that they were gay or bi, polyamorous or trans, Alana decided she was bisexual and, at 24, started dating a woman. When the relationship ended 6 months later, Alana found herself looking back on the prior decade with a fresh perspective and wanting to analyze what she'd been through. First, that required a label. New categories of relationships with new names had helped the queer people she'd met find happiness after all. She'd entertained a few options, late bloomer, non-blooming, perpetual single. Then it came to her, involuntary celibate. Alana built a simple all-text website, Alana's Involuntary Celibate Project. And while it's long gone, she and a few others shared their memories with me, and Alana sent me a packet of old posts. The site was populated by men and women, but certainly more men, which Alana had mixed feelings about. While the men were prone to antagonistic, repetitive complaining, she truly wanted her project to be a home for all incels. Rigid gender norms, she thought, burdened everyone. There were so many ways for people to end up lonely, from awkwardness to mental illness to an overinvestment in the normal. I don't care if your reason is that you always fall in love with horses and horses aren't legal to fall in love with, she says, trying to capture the level of inclusiveness she'd aspired to. I figured the sexist ugliness had driven Alana from her site. The moderator of Forever Alone Women, an offshoot of a Reddit forum called Forever Alone, had told me that she spends a couple hours a day screening out comments from men such as, "You could get effed anytime," or "You're just an attention whore." Whenever she deletes an offensive message or bans a user, she can expect a death or rape threat, she says. Alana's story is different and a little heartbreaking. For a few years after founding the project, she says, she was celibate, but she gradually became more socially confident. By then, living in Toronto, she started to date men as well as women, read queer liberation theory, and explored polyamory. At this point in the story, Alana hesitates, obviously uncomfortable. You know, in grade school, the cooties thing, she ventured, you don't want to hang out with someone less cool than you are in case you catch the uncoolness. Alana knows how ironic it is, not to mention unjust and stupid of her, but she turned the site over to someone she didn't know and never looked back. Then, last February, reading a copy of Mother Jones in a local bookstore, she learned about Elliot Rodger and his identification as an incel. Holy shit, she remembers thinking, look what I started. Well, so anyway, Alana, now the military is giving out warnings to people to not go see the Joker movie because of incels. Now, I've done my fair share. I've gone down the incel rabbit hole. And man, let me tell you, it's like people who want to get producer credits on movies without doing the work. The only way you're going to change your life. As a matter of fact, yesterday on Twitter, I made some comment about this, and somebody actually wrote back to me on Twitter and said, females just aren't interesting to talk to. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, man, what world do we live in now? I think people should go back and watch original Star Trek, because I learned that, Captain Kirk was the man, but he liked women wherever he went. He didn't expect anything, and the people that he'd hooked up with were lawyers and scientists and captains. And sometimes he, like Drusilla in Bread and Circuses, he got thrown a few curves and she happened to be a slave. But, he was trying to save him and himself, his shipmates, and his ship. from being dying in the gladiatorial games on New Roma. So yeah, it's a tough thing, but I can't believe we now live in a world where the military has to issue warnings because of incel forums on the dark web threatening to shoot up movie theaters with where they're playing Joker. I mean, isn't that? I would think that wouldn't they flock to the Joker? Wouldn't the Joker become like watching somebody at your favorite mega church delivering a sermon? Like, why would you want to shoot up people going to see the Joker? Wouldn't you think that those people would be the very people that are going to try and understand what's going on and where you're coming from and all that? We live in a strange world, but we live in a world where I just don't understand. Why doesn't anybody want to do the work? You know, it's not so hard. You can't blame. It's not just part of the reason people are attracted to anybody, whether you're straight, gay, transgendered, non-binary. You're attracted to people for a multitude of reasons. It's not just looks. A lot of it has to do with personality. A lot of it has to do with your soul. A lot of it has to do with the kind of jokes you tell. I mean, it's just a strange thing that people would rather write about shooting up a movie theater than actually doing the work and going out, get on a dating site, learn to talk to people, do the work, man. What since when do people not do the work anymore? You got to do the work. You got to put in the time. I mean, read some Malcolm Gladwell or whatever. Didn't he write about the 10,000 hours? You have to do 10,000 hours before you're good at something. Well, go out and talk to girls for 10,000 hours. Put in your time. That's what I would do. I mean, it's just strange. I'm deeply saddened by the world. Willow Yang says, do you think the controversy will hurt Joker at the box office or conversely generate more publicity and curiosity in the movie? Well, I think it's both. I think, look, people are going to flock to see the Joker. Maybe Warner Brothers is going to cause, maybe the studio is going to cause more security. But it is, after all, it's so strange that the Joker, the character, is a homicidal maniac. And the fact that he's being treated, that this is some incel anthem, that they've embraced the Joker. I mean, it's so funny. The last time we saw the Joker on screen, his girlfriend was Margot Robbie. I mean, the ultimate Stacy. I don't know if the Joker could be called a Chad, but I mean, it's like the last time we saw the Joker on the screen, he had one of the most beautiful women, arguably working in Hollywood today, as his girlfriend. So the fact that now this Joker movie is going to stand as an anthem for incels everywhere or whatever is strange to me. I don't know if it's really been thought through. It just seems quite odd. Quite odd. Jordy54 says, joining fee to the Post-Geek Singularity can't PayPal. Well, Jordy, thank you. Your participation is enough. But I want to thank you for supporting the channel. Amir B says, aside from the fact that there's no causation between violence in movies and real life, no one labeled Joker concerning until a group of critics and journalists. You're right. It was critics. It was a critic that called the Joker a movie, or Joker an incel anthem, or like that. You are absolutely right. And I think that was a ridiculous comment to make, because the way I see it, I have not seen the movie. I think the Joker shows a little bit more wherewithal. At least he gets out into the world. And even though he was forged by society's cruelty and perhaps indifference and intolerance, and he was turned into basically a weapon of mass destruction by our cruel and unfeeling civilization, at least he has the wherewithal to get out there and, make sure the world, sure, he's a homicidal maniac, but, he's not just sitting on the dark web bitching and moaning. And that's something. I mean, if you're going to be a homicidal maniac, and again, I'm just being darkly funny. But anyway. Oh, Amir B says, okay, aside from the fact that there's no causation between violence in the movies and real life, no one labeled Joker concerning that until a group of critics and journalists started doing so. They started this controversy. No one has even seen the movie. trolls and vile people are just piggybacking on the narrative that is shameful. Well, I mean, that might be true, but the fact is the military did issue this based on information that they did obtain from the FBI that was monitoring dark websites where incels are meeting. I mean, it's amazing. You'd think that incel groups would do like meetups where they could talk about over a beer, like perhaps maybe we should go out and maybe try and go meet girls. But you know what? I have a theory. I don't think incels really do want to meet girls. I think they'd rather just stay home and bitch because it's hard, man. It's hard to meet girls. It's hard for anybody to meet girls. It's never easy. It's terrifying. And I guess now, I mean, you can meet in my day, you had to have game, man. You had to be able to walk up to I'll tell you, I'll give you here. I'll tell you, when I was younger and prettier, here was the Rob Burnett methodology of picking up women. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Here's how I picked up women. So I whenever I go out, no matter where I go, even now, I observe people. I listen to the way they talk. I love looking at how people are dressed. I love listening to what they are saying, not just how they're talking, but what they're saying, how they interact. I like to watch how people laugh. I learn a lot about people by watching how they laugh. Do people chuckle? Do they go, ha, ha, ha? Do they leave their mouth open? I mean, how people laugh is really interesting. It says a lot. I like how people talk on the phone. There's all these things out there that just wandering around. It's like I'm going to go meet Mike Bodden. Mike Bodden is here in Los Angeles, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, for those who might be wondering, I'm going to be doing some unboxing with Mike Bodden, probably here. I'm not ready to move into the garage yet, but this week, either tomorrow, probably Saturday. And if not Saturday, then maybe Sunday. But for anybody who sent me anything, we're doing an unboxing live. Mike Bodden is going to be here. I'm getting on the train. I'm going to take the train from Pasadena to Hollywood because I love doing that just because I get to see people, how they react. But it's like that's I just think it's such a strange thing. Why not get out into the world? I'll tell you one thing. You're never going to meet a girl sitting at home bitching on the dark web to other dudes and you're talking about Stacy's and Chad's. You're never going to, I can guarantee you're not going to do that. It's not a good thing. And in terms of why do you want to go, why does anybody talk about shooting up a movie theater showing Joker? I mean, don't we want a Joker movie? Isn't that what you wanted to see? I know I want to see that. Look, if anybody ruins my experience of seeing Joker by coming to the theater with guns, I'm going to be very disappointed. It's like what the old man said in RoboCop, Dick, I'm very disappointed. Here is a letter from Victor Acosta. And it's interesting. It just says #Willow. Oh, no, it doesn't. It's actually a letter. Victor Acosta has written a letter. It says, criminal, talks about criminal, or in the case of a very interesting experiment from Netflix. So, Rob, I've talked before about my love for Netflix and its original content on a previous letter. So forgive me for indulging once more in my love of this weird network. Yes, when you think about it, you can probably call Netflix a network now, and its inability to properly market its great content. This past weekend, I was casually flipping through what's new on the Netflix app when I ran into a new show called Criminal UK. Now, on first glance, it seemed like a fairly simple premise. 3 45-minute episodes wherein we are witnesses to 3 different interrogations in a police station located in the UK. I decided to watch just because some of the actors involved are perennial favorites of mine, chief among them David Tennant and Haley Atwell. Both were great, by the way. I must say I thoroughly enjoyed this show as each interrogation gave you a different glimpse into how dark and evil the human psyche can get, as far as the criminals being interrogated go, while also giving you a slight backstory with regard to the interrogators that makes you feel like you're coming onto the show where these people have been working together for years and have a lot of history between all of them. I loved every single episode, and the finale in episode 3 was both unexpected and hugely satisfying. Agreed. Now, here's where things get interesting. After the end of the 3rd episode, I let the credits run because I was busy warming up some food. So when the credits finished rolling, the app took me directly to the recommended for you because you watch Criminal screen. And lo and behold, what do I see? Criminal Spain. What the hell is this? I said to myself. So I proceeded to click on the suggested title. And that's when I discovered that Netflix had done a cute little experiment for the show. Criminal is basically an international show spread across 4 different countries, which are the United Kingdom, Spain, France, and Germany. The premise is basically the same for each country. 3 episodes, 1 different interrogation per episode, all filmed on the same set, but with different international casts and different languages for each country. I quickly devoured Criminal Spain, and I must say it was just as good, if not better, than the UK version. I still haven't seen the Germany or France versions, but if they have the same quality as the UK and Spain shows, I will count this show as one of my favorite Netflix shows ever. I agree wholeheartedly with you. I don't think I've ever seen this kind of show before. The idea of seeing the same premise of a series through the prism of 4 different nations and all of the differences that pop up due to the different cultures seems like a unique and new idea to me. This is why, to me, Netflix is still the streaming network to beat. Hopefully, Netflix will get its marketing act together soon so that they are better able to promote great shows like this one, and so they are better able to fight off all the pretenders to their throne that are going to start coming for the top spot in the streaming world. Until then, I'll help them out by giving the show a glowing review on your channel and by recommending the show to you and all the other members of the great Post-Geek Singularity community. Go watch Criminal, guys. This show is definitely worth binging. P.S. # Willow Yang for every possible episode forever. No, Willow, I've not given up. The crusade continues. Well, Victor, I am with you 100%, man. I loved Criminal. I've only watched Criminal UK and the first episode of Criminal France, and it's really interesting because the first episode, it won't ruin anything to say that it has to deal with the attack at the Bataclan. Where the Eagles of Dark Metal were playing when that horrible attack in France a couple years back. It's really good. So I've watched 4 of the episodes, 4 of the 12. I look forward to digging in. Haven't seen any of Criminal Germany or Criminal Spain, but I'm really looking forward to it. Vegetable Tube is here. Wow, Vegetable Tube. Thank you very much for the generous support of the channel. Is Kevin Feige trying to connect the MCU and the Star Wars universe? Interesting. First of all, I don't believe so. I don't believe that he's going to, although I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't mind that. If they could come up with, look, if we know, like, obviously the MCU continuity is huge, and crossing the streams certainly has happened in comic books. Star Trek, you can see Star Trek Green Lantern, Star Trek Legion of Superheroes, Star Trek Doctor Who, Star Trek Planet of the Apes. I don't think that from a business standpoint or a shareholder standpoint, they would allow it. However, Star Wars and the MCU are the biggest grossing entertainment concerns ever Hollywood's ever seen. And if anybody could come up with a way to make a cool crossover between Star Wars and the MCU, I think it would be Kevin Feige. Now, I don't think it's going to happen. I've heard no rumblings to that effect. And I also don't think necessarily Kevin Feige, I don't know if we would want to have the universes irrevocably linked. I don't know if we would, but I do love the idea of a one-off. When I was a kid, they did obviously the treasury-sized edition when they did Superman and Spider-Man. And I loved it. When I was a kid, I loved it so much. And then, of course, in the early 80s, the X-Men crossed over with the Teen Titans. And Darkseid and Dark Phoenix were the villains. And I love that. I didn't necessarily give it any credence. Star Trek has crossed over with the X-Men. So I wonder, if people knew that it was sort of a one-off, I think it could be embraced if it was good. And if there's somebody that could make it good, it would be Kevin Feige. Do I think he's going to do it? Probably not. Because I think Kevin Feige really, as a fan, I know he loves Star Wars and I know he loves Star Trek. I think he's a purist. I think what Kevin Feige wants to do is actually play within the canonical Star Wars universe. That's what everybody wants to do. I mean, if you're a fan of something, you dream of making something that's canonical. Certainly, when I was involved with the Axanar project, the fan film project Axanar, the Star Trek fan film project, we were bending over backwards to make it canonical in every way, shape, and form. That was the fun of it, was to give people something that felt like canonical Star Trek. Now it seems to me that now Axanar can never be canonical because the whole idea of it has been negated by Star Trek Discovery. So, anyway, I don't know if I would still have enthusiasm for working on Axanar at this point in my life if I was still involved. Anyway, but it would be pretty damn cool. I think it would be. I would like it. I kind of would like it. I think. I think it would. I think it'd be kind of cool. I don't know. What do you guys think? Would it be cool? I don't know. This next letter comes from Dan Allen. Hey, Rob, long time no talk. I read an article and I watched a couple of YouTube shows focused on the story that Joaquin Phoenix walked out on an interview after the interviewer asked him Joker might perversely end up inspiring exactly the kind of people it's about with potentially tragic results. That was a question he wouldn't answer. Do you agree he should have walked out or no? I feel like if people are going to hurt people, maim people, kill people, they had that in their hearts from the beginning. It wouldn't take a movie about a psychotic killer who had a bad upbringing and who was treated wrong. The last paragraph describes me. I had a bad upbringing. My dad beat myself, my mother, and my brothers and sisters, and my brothers and sister. He was an alcoholic and got very violent toward his family. Also, with my disability, I didn't get along with kids in school. I've been treated bad by my employers and coworkers over the years as well. If anybody would be motivated to do these kinds of things, it would be me. But I don't want to do these things. I just try and overcome my rough upbringing and bad life by working hard and doing the things that I love and enjoy, like watching sports and movies and TV shows. You can do what you want if you feel like it, but if you want to dwell on the negative things, that's on you. Or you can try and be positive if you want to be. Just some thoughts on this. Thoughts I had. Thanks, Rob. Talk to you later. Dan Skip Allen. Well, Dan Skip Allen, thanks for that letter. I appreciate it. Yes. First of all, humankind, for the most part, has been pretty hideous to each other for most of human history. And while there's still massive injustice going on in the world, there's horrible abuse that people suffer at the hands of their fellow human beings on every different level in every society, including ours. Things are better than they were. Things are always getting a little bit better. It's a lifestyle choice. And I understand people are put upon, but a movie, there's no piece of entertainment that should ever be looked upon as an excuse to visit real violence and hurt upon your fellow human being. There's in my mind, there's no excuse. And it should never happen. It should never happen. And I'm right there with you. And I find it, horrifying that we live in a world that anybody would do something like that. Yeah. Horrifying. This one comes from Mr. Rick Green. Hey, Rob, here's a thought experiment on aliens. Assuming aliens exist at all, could they not also simply be future inhabitants of Earth? Would this not make more sense? Let's assume they're real. The secretive nature of them could be explained by them not wanting to alter the timeline in a way that might affect their existence. They may be looking into us in the same way that we look into the existence of dinosaurs. They may want to study us in a way that doesn't alter the timeline for them. If they are future inhabitants, perhaps even future inhabitants of Mars, who knows? This is assuming they're real in the first place. I'm the kind of person who needs real proof, but as a thought experiment, I felt it would be more likely they're from the future rather than from another galaxy. I don't think I've heard too much about this possibility, assuming they exist at all. This just seems more logical than them coming all this way and hiding. Well, first of all, let's just assume, let's take your thought experiment let's take it at face value. Why would they come back? If you're a time traveler, what is it about this particular era that would make it worth coming back to? Unless there's something that we don't yet know, there's some amazing historical forces at work that we're on the precipice of some major transformation, and that could possibly be true. why would time travelers come back here? I would think that, of course, there's an interesting movie about this very premise that David Twohy wrote and directed called The Grand Tour, Disaster in Time. I think it's an early 90s movie. It was a cable movie. Jeff Daniels is in it. I highly recommend it. It's about time traveling tourists that come back to, I'll tell you, I guess it's a spoiler, but it's about tourists from the future that come back to watch natural or unnatural disasters happen. And I think if I was a time traveler, if you were a time traveler coming from the future to go visit mankind's past, where would you go? Like, I would go, I would bring my video camera back and go to Golgotha, check it out, watch the crucifixion of Christ and his resurrection. I'd put that shit on my future Instagram feed. I'd go back and I'd film dinosaurs for real. Sound of Thunder style on, some pathway so I don't step on an ant or something that causes the future to not happen. But I would go back to, different battles, Agincourt, things like that. Maybe go back to see the first Mozart concert. Or I'd go back and I would watch The Wizard of Oz for the first time in a movie theater. Or go back and meet Mark Twain, hang out with Stanley Kubrick when he was still 16, hustling chess and taking pictures for Look magazine. How cool would it be to go back in time and go meet these historical figures? I just don't think time travelers would come here to this time. Of course, they might know something that I don't know. It's an intriguing idea, though. I don't know if I buy into it. This next one, actually, let's see if anybody sent in any. Go back to the chat here. Mark C is asking, what's on the t-shirt you're wearing? That would be a Gorn. This would be the Gorn captain. There's the Gorn. The Gorn from the Star Trek episode, the first season Star Trek episode, Arena. As many people know, I've worn this shirt before. This is a Her Universe shirt. It's way too tight on me. I just like the fact that it was like a blacklight Gorn shirt. So yeah, Her Universe made a Gorn t-shirt. I was like, ugh. And that was like, I got it at Comic-Con. It was funny. I think this is what, if I remember correctly, it was even given to me when I went up to, I think it was the first time Her Universe, which is a clothing label, geek clothing label for girls. And they've got great stuff. But it was the first year they existed. And I went up there and I'm like, oh my God, I have to have that shirt. And it was given to me. I said, I want to wear that. I've never seen a blacklight I don't even know if it is a blacklight shirt. I just assume it was. I just thought it was so cool that they did a blacklight Gorn shirt. So I had to have it. Cal, my man Cal from Malaysia, Swag Props is in the house. Yo, what's up? Hi, Rob. Here's a hypothetical poser for you. You wake up to a fine morning. You have a hearty breakfast, read or watch the news, and play with Gilbert and Tallulah. Suddenly, your mobile phone rings, and from the screen, you see that the caller is someone high up in CBS. You answer the call. The person on the other line says, hi, and you go through the pleasantries. He then tells you that he just had a meeting with the CBS top brass, and they're not happy with a certain someone and the way he's managing Star Trek Discovery. Said top brass want that certain someone replaced with a person who not only loves the Star Trek franchise and knows it like the back of his hand, but has experience in the business. Your name and the person one on the other end of the line says came up during the discussion. Long story short, you get offered the position of showrunner of Star Trek Discovery starting with season 3. Question, do you accept it? If yes, how would you make Discovery more in line with canonical Star Trek, i.e. TOS all the way through to Enterprise, in order for it to appeal to existing fans as well as attract new ones to the franchise? Sincerely, Cal, a.k.a. Swag Props. P.S. I know I said the question was hypothetical, but believe me when I say if there's even a possibility of your being offered that position, the Post-Geek Singularity will be rooting for you all the way. Heck, if CBS wants referrals from contacts all over the world, feel free to let us know. Oh, you're sweet, Cal. For those of you who don't know, Swag Props, or Cal, he makes prop replica books, and his work is amazing. You can go to Swag Props, and that's S''WAK. Word 1, word 2 is the word props. Go to Etsy and look up Swag Props. His Grail Diary from Last Crusade, Henry Jones's Grail Diary, Sean Connery's Grail Diary, does incredible work. He was generous enough to send me his version of the book, the Nine Gates, the Kingdom of Heaven, from Roman Polanski's movie, The Ninth Gate, which I love. I can't believe that he even makes that. It's so incredible. He does such great work. And while it's not a screen use prop and it's a fan made prop, the quality is through the roof. So go check out his Etsy store. What a great gift. If you want to give, if you've got the cash and you're so inclined and you want to give somebody a really unique gift, I saw he had a book about, I think it was Labyrinth. It's popped up in my feed, a book from Labyrinth. I don't know if it was from the movie Labyrinth, but it's really cool. I just saw it real quick. I saw that yesterday. So would I, you know what? Here's the thing. I probably wouldn't. I would, even though they offered me, I would politely decline. I mean, look, it depends how much money they paid me, but I really do think I think Discovery is sort of beyond saving. I know what they're going to do now is they've realized, oh, we're going to send Discovery 1,000 years in the future, and they're going to reinvent Star Trek again. I just don't think that. I mean, I'll be honest. When I first heard that they're going to send Discovery 1,000 years in the future, it reminded me of a Star Trek premise before J.J. Abrams was announced as being taking over Star Trek in 2007, Bad Robot. While Superman Returns during Post, I was in Seattle with Bryan Singer. And at the time, Chris McCorry, who was Brian's childhood friend, lived in Seattle. And we went to a sushi restaurant in Madison Park, which is also where my grandparents lived. And I went at this dinner. It was a very sake-soaked sushi dinner. And I brought up to these guys, I'm like, why don't we come up with a pitch for Star Trek? And McCorry would write it, Brian would direct it, and I would be involved as some kind of a consultant and a producer on the show. And they're like, that's a great idea. I threw out this overarching idea that what if we went to the year 3000? Basically, it wasn't 1,000 years in the future. We'd go from the 24th century to the year 3001, basically. And my idea was that the universe looked very different than it did in the time of the Next Generation. So we had all of the familiar things, but everything old was new again. And the Federation was in decline. The Klingons were very different than the way they are now. They had undergone a reformation. There was unification had happened between the Romulans and the Vulcans. And the universe looked very, very different than it did 600 years previous. And that was my premise. And it's called Star Trek Federation. And I employed somebody I was working with at the time, Jeff Thorne, who's a great TV writer. He's also written Star Trek Titan novels. Great writer, very, very talented guy. And I pitched these ideas to Jeff Thorne, and he ran with them, and he came up with an actual written pitch. Because even though Brian and Chris McCorry and I were throwing these ideas back and forth, nothing was really set in stone. And it was very broad strokes, but I basically gave them my idea, and they're like, that sounds really, really good. So then I went to Jeff Thorne and I said, here are the notions that we had come up with, but we had nothing was really fleshed out. And I said, go with this and run with it. And so Jeff Thorne wrote a treatment and came up with a lot of really great ideas and things that Jeff and I had talked about, but he wrote this up. And then I had Mike Akuda do a logo for Star Trek Federation. It was called Star Trek Federation. And because it was basically about the overarching premise of the show was we were going to, the Federation that was in decline, we were going to restore it to its former luster. And that's what the show was really about. And admittedly, in the actual treatment that you can find online, like if you just look up Star Trek Federation, you find the treatment online. There's a lot of fan service. One of my favorite things is we called the new ship's computers Majel, M-A-J. You'll see. So I thought it was very interesting that the Discovery went 1,000 years in the future. Now, there is canonical stuff that we saw in Enterprise and Voyager and things like that with 1,000 years in the future. But I thought it was interesting that that's what they decided to do. things that make you go, But then it was quickly announced that J.J. Abrams Bad Robot was taking over, and this is in 2007. So any ideas that Bryan Singer, Chris McQuarrie, and I would have moved forward pitching this idea quickly fell by the wayside because we were beaten to the punch, which is too bad. But it is interesting that that's the way they wanted to take Discovery. I'm not making casting dispersions. I'm not saying anything about it. It's just interesting, and we'll see. This next letter comes all the way from Japan, from Lynn Hobday. Love Lynn. She's delightful. She's a lovely human being. And while I have not actually heard her work, she just, she's very cute. So she must be genius, right? Isn't that what we all think about people? Anyway, Lynn is writing from Japan. Hi, Rob. Well, I'm drinking red wine and eating a biryani, which means it's time to summon up the courage to write another letter. I've been in Japan for 30 years now, and I've ended up in a dilemma where I find my English comes across as stilted. Although my Japanese is pretty fluent, there are many people who can both speak and write better than I. I'm normally stranded somewhere in the silence in between the two languages, afraid to open my cake hole. However, I must admit that in a bloody-minded attempt to salvage my fragile ego, I do write lyrics professionally in Japanese, and I'm sometimes pretty good. Anyhow, many thanks to Kenny Crayley Jr. for bringing up the subject of movie music. I had a very extensive LP collection of soundtracks when I was growing up. In fact, I still do, and that is where I retreated when I needed some me space. Indeed, it is movie music that originally brought me to Japan. Once I heard the minimalistic yet exotically lush soundtrack for that Ryuichi Sakamoto wrote for Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, I was entranced by the Japanese culture. And after corresponding with a Japanese girl who worked for Sony through a pen pal exchange that I stumbled across in New Music Express Weekly, I landed in Japan in 1987. By the way, that theme, the Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence theme, Forbidden Colors is what it's actually called. There's actually a vocal version of it that Ryuichi Sakamoto did with David Sylvian, one of my favorite artists, once the lead singer for the band Japan, I guess the new romantic band Japan that I really like. And also he went off on his own and recorded albums like Secrets of the Beehive and Gone to Earth. David Sylvian is one of my favorite musicians. That's just an aside, but that is a great score. And Ryuichi Sakamoto was, of course, with YMO. I guess it was Yellow. It was either Yellow Magic or Yellow Machine Orchestra, I think. Anyway, you just say this. I landed in Japan in 1987. I've never looked back, and in spite of daily frustrations, have felt that Japan is my spiritual home. Funnily enough, the president of the agency that I'm represented by was a mixing engineer for YMO, an iconic techno-pop band to which Ryuichi Sakamoto belonged to. I do agree that movie music of late is pretty bland. Even so, I cheered when Thor, Groot, and Rocket landed in the middle of the Battle of Wakanda. The Avengers theme caused me and quite a few others to shout out in glee. Such a great entrance. Not originally a big MCU fan, but have been on board since the Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Whatever, I do feel that movie music is in excellent hands. I hadn't bought a film soundtrack for years until I saw Pacific Rim. That is a great score. On a streaming site in 2014, I was devastated that I hadn't seen this movie in the theater. I'd poo-pooed it. And to my date, the scene where Gypsy Danger smashes Itachi with a ship is still one of my favorite movie scenes ever. Releases so much tension and perversely leaves me grinning from ear to ear. Of course, I had to watch Pacific Rim for the first time on my spanking new 4K TV last night. It was awesome. Man, I can only imagine the kind of technology you can get in Japan, too. Pacific Rim, with its soaring guitars, orchestra, and quirky synthesizers, not only fits the film perfectly, cutting out where needed, it is also great for power walking, too. Indeed, it is. Next up, realizing that Ramin Djawadi had also written the music for Iron Man 1. Who knew that a guy making stuff could be such a turn-on? Great themes, and it's a shame they were never used again. And then, of course, there's Game of Thrones. The main reason I can't really hate on Season 8 is the amazing music that Ramin Djawadi, I can't pronounce that, provided for it. If the worst comes to the worst, the whole season 8 could be regarded as one of the most expensive and effective music videos ever. I was so happy to hear that Ramin won an Emmy Award. Ramin won an Emmy Award for his music. How do you pronounce his name, somebody? Give it to me phonetically. I was so happy to hear that Ramin won the Emmy Award for his music for the Battle of Winterfell. He practically carried the 8th season single-handedly on his back, and it's no surprise that the view count for the Night King currently stands at 16,986,880. The final cue of the episode, where Melisandre leaves Winterfell, takes off her necklace and walks into the snowy dawn, is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard, and is an extremely interesting choice. We hear the Lord of Light theme for the last time, and as she falls to the snow, never to rise again, the whole damn episode ends on a quiet and poignant major chord, informing us that the storm is over and this character's destiny has been fulfilled, and she is at rest. Cor blimey. In spite of the major problems I think everyone has with the final season, Ramin Djawadi has always been on form and related the narrative of the entire 8 seasons to the music he created. You don't need to hear a line of dialogue or watch a single scene to remember the story. It's all there in the music. Not only is he my favorite movie composer, he has created some of my favorite music ever. It's no secret that he loved the character of Daenerys, and it shows in the amazing Targaryen, Unsullied, and Dragon themes. They move me to tears every time. One of my biggest dreams is to catch up with the Game of Thrones music show that has been touring the world. The series may be over, but the music lives on in our hearts. In light of the current disarray in which the music industry stands, I am deeply heartened that so many people, not necessarily fans of classical music, can deeply appreciate the emotional and cultural scope of Ramin's music. Although Game of Thrones is a TV series, the music is epic and cinematic, and there is hope for all of us if we can share and understand the language of music. Well, I'm tucking into some samosa now, so I better sign off. Thanks, as always, to you and the amazing imagination connoisseurs for these stimulating discussions. All the best, Lynn Hobday. Well, Lynn, I love hearing from you. Thank you for that lovely letter. I agree. I mean, I think what a great, just a tremendous talent, and the music of Game of Thrones it's incredible. It's incredible. I loved it. And I still do. And man, I listen to the Pacific Rim score all the time. I love the Pacific Rim score. Anthony Gonzalez says, check it out, Rob. Depeche Mode just released a teaser trailer to their documentary, Spirits in the Forest. Do you enjoy the silence? Yes, I do enjoy the silence. Is here in my arms. I'm a huge Depeche Mode fan. For the record, I think my favorite Depeche Mode album is Black Celebration, because death is everywhere. There are flies on the windscreen. But not tonight. Oh God, it's raining and I'm not. No, I've always loved Depeche Mode. I grew up loving Depeche Mode. Speak and Spell, Music for the Masses. I have so many Depeche Mode CD singles, and oh man, I am definitely a fan of Dave and the Boys, let me tell you. And again, like Duran Duran, they're like 40 years old. So I'm so glad they're still kicking. I'd love to see a documentary about them. I have the Duran Duran documentary, Sing Blue Silver, which I actually watch more than I probably should. And, speaking of Lynn, the Paper Gods tour, there's a video that keeps popping up of the entire Paper Gods concert. I guess it's in Tokyo. Maybe it's in Osaka. Not to make this all about Duran Duran, but hey, I love Depeche Mode. Now I want to hear Black Celebration. I love how it begins. Do 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 do. Let's have a black celebration. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Word Balloon. John Suntress is here, ladies and gentlemen, from the Word Balloon podcast. I love John Suntress' podcast, and so should you. If you haven't watched the Word Balloon podcast or listened to it, go listen to it. It's one of the great pop culture podcasts of all time. It is great. John Suntress asks, Mark Miller's Chrononauts comic book has time travelers taking selfies all across history, from dinosaurs to partying with Marilyn Monroe. Great miniseries. I mean, I could see that. One of the great, I think, honestly, the first thing that comes to mind, if I suddenly developed the ability to time travel first of all, I'd have to work out and get in incredible shape. I would have to be huge, just like, I'd have to look like a CrossFit guy, get all ripped, and buy some incredible clothes, age or not time appropriate clothes. And the first thing, I hate to say it, but if I could travel through time, I wouldn't take selfies. I'd want to hook up with Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly, Rear Window, Grace Kelly. I've read a lot about her. That would be, actually that's probably what I'd want to do in general. Just go on a sex tour of time. Because why not? That just meet girls, talk about it. There's my sci-fi, there's my ambition. Sure, I'd like to go hang out with Stanley Kubrick and go meet my favorite filmmakers, but basically, I would use time travel to go try and sleep with all the great women of the world. And would anybody blame me? And I would practice the campground philosophy. You'd want to leave them like you leave a campground better off than it was when you arrived. Bring a little of that cunning linguist philosophy, or the philosophy that my characters in Free Enterprise espouse, which is, of course, ladies first. Apply that in all things. And I'm sure as I went back further into time, that philosophy would be more and more appreciated. Of course, people would be taking less and less showers, so it'd be less and less enjoyable. But it would be fun. I did not know that was a comic book. I love that Mark Millar wrote a comic, or Mark Miller. Okay, I won't say Millar. Mark Miller wrote a comic book about people traveling through time and taking selfies and partying. Because isn't that what most of us would do? I'd want to go watch the moon landing. Go watch the Saturn V take off. I think it'd be great. To go through history and see all those things. What would really be cool is, I know this was an old time tunnel episode, but wouldn't it be cool if you had a way to get out of what disaster? You could even be a disaster tourist, like you could be on the Titanic. You could buy passage on the Titanic, and you knew what was going to happen. So you bug out before it got really hairy, but you could go all over the place. You could see all these great historical events. It'd be awesome. And if you had a time travel device, what really would be fun is to screw with history also, to go through time and just mess up as much as you could just to see what would happen. That could be fun too. But yeah, I didn't know that. But everybody should go and watch or listen to the Word Balloon podcast. I guess I've all given you too much TMI now. Willow Yang, which do you think is the best season of TNG? I feel like I'm being bombarded with great episodes in season 3. Hope this continues in later seasons. You know what? A lot of people say that season 3 is the best of Next Generation, but I do think that it gets pretty consistent. There are great episodes in seasons 4, 5, and 6. It starts to get lame in season 7, although there's still great episodes, and it does have one of the final episode of Next Generation is one of the greatest episodes of television, which you will ever. It's one of the best series finales ever, and I think, Will, you'll really like it. But yeah, season 3 is a potpourri of riches. And leading into the first episode of season 4, well, I won't tell you about it. It's not as strong as you might want it, but then the second episode of season 4 is one of the great episodes of Next Gen. But yeah, I think you're now into, other than season 7, which is really hit and miss, you're into the seasons 3, 4, 5, and 6, peak TNG. So you're in for a treat. Chris Bravoto says, "Thank you for reading my letter. Sorry it was hard to read." No worries. That could just be me. Question. Why isn't there chat about Michelle R? Yes. At Lucas. So it's Kathleen Kennedy, Michelle, then Feige. Who could take over at the MCU? Where is this Iger for POTUS coming from? Well, first of all, what you're talking about is there is Michelle, and I even did a chat about her, and let's see. I want to get her name right. So it's again, because I was going to say it from Dawaji. It's Michelle Rejwan. Michelle Rejwan is basically, she has taken over. She's president. Let me get this right. She is the senior vice president of live action development and production for Lucasfilm. So here's the thing. I don't think Kevin Feige is going to take over Lucasfilm. Michelle, she's right below Kathleen Kennedy. I think Kevin Feige would love to make Star Wars movies, but he wants to do a lot of other things. He's got a lot on his plate. But yes, nobody is talking about her because people forget who she is. She's not the president of Lucasfilm. She's president of live action. She's president of a division, but it's something people should talk about. You know, I don't know. I don't know if Kevin Feige will be allowed to leave, at least for the time being. You know, coming off of the most lucrative film of all time and beginning Disney Plus, which is a whole new division, a whole new thing for Disney. I think Kevin Feige, they're going to want him to stay in place. I mean, God only knows what his bonuses are and how much money they're giving him, but I'm sure it's a lot. And I don't see him as would you leave? No, but he can do both. I mean, he can stay at Marvel just to see, help build something new. I think the one mountain he hasn't climbed is Disney is building their streaming service. And at one corner of this is obviously The Mandalorian, but really what nobody is talking about is that these Marvel shows, of which there are a lot, is going to be a core pillar of the success of this. It's a foundational thing. The MCU is a foundational thing for the success of this streaming service. And I think you point out, rightfully so, that Michelle at Lucasfilm she and Kathleen Kennedy have it handled, but Kevin Feige producing a film, they're going to be like, great. And I'm sure Kevin Feige, here's the thing. Kevin Feige doesn't have to come up with an idea. He already knows what he wants to do. Make no mistake. They know. They've planned all this stuff for any eventuality. You think Kevin Feige hasn't talked about what he wants to do with the Star Wars universe? Of course he has. Of course he has. They know. The fact that we're hearing about this, it's already been done. I mean, Hollywood, sometimes years go by before this information is disseminated to us as the public. They know. He knows it's not going to get announced for a while because God only knows that the fan community they're never going to say anything. All they can do is get bad press. So why release it? They already know what they're going to do. This next letter comes from Craig Stratton. Hello, Rob. Today I want to ask by the way, thank you for supporting the channel. Today I want to ask, how should they do Justice League 2 if they ever do that? I was not a fan of the first Justice League movie. However, DC has seemingly picked itself up. However, I worry if they decide to do another Justice League movie. We've changed Batman actors since the last Justice League movie and very likely need a new Superman. But we will probably still have the same Wonder Woman and Aquaman and Flash and Cyborg and who knows anymore. If you ask me, there are 4 options. Option 1, change the team. Keeping Wonder Woman and Aquaman, but change some other heroes. Put Shazam in there. Give us Green Lantern. Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter, maybe. Though, is it right to have a jail movie without Batman and Superman? Option 2. Put in new actors to replace Batman and Superman. This could work. However, I don't think Robert Pattinson Batman is meant to be a replacement for Ben Affleck. Absolutely not. It will break continuity to have Batman suddenly younger. I have faith he and Pattinson will be a great Batman. I have faith Pattinson will be a great Batman. So recasting again in order to have a Batman in the league won't work. Option 3, full reboot. Have Pattinson be the new Justice League Batman and build the universe around him and recast the rest of the team. However, both Gal Gadot and Jason Momoa are doing very well in their roles, and I don't want to lose them for the sake of a new Justice League movie. Option 4, don't do another Justice League movie. Honestly, that is sad to say, but DC is doing better with standalone stories. If it means getting better movies, then why bother with another Justice League? Maybe try again in a decade, but for now, just tell standalone stories. What do you, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett, think? And if you can think of anything else, then please share. Well, first of all, Craig, great letter. Thank you. As everyone knows, no one was more excited about the Justice League movie than I was. I'm a huge Justice League fan. I was very disappointed in the film, to be honest. I tried watching it again. It's on Netflix, and man, it's really disappointing. It's a really disappointing movie. It doesn't feel like a Justice League movie. I'm going to give you a radical idea. Guardians of the Galaxy worked really well. One of my favorite things, my favorite comic shows as a little kid and growing up was Justice League. I love the Justice League. I love the Justice League of America. They're my favorite. And when I started reading comics, when the Justice League, it wasn't Justice League of America, but when they rebooted Justice League as Justice League and it later became Justice League International, J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen and Kevin Maguire's amazing artwork. They made Justice League comedic. If I could do, if anybody came to me and said, Rob, you can do anything you want with Justice League, I would do Justice League International. I would go back and I would do that, and I would make it very much, I mean, it's not like this, but I'm using it as an example, Guardians of the Galaxy, because that the thing is, Batman is very much a part of that Justice League. You got to have Batman in it. And I don't know what I would do there, but I love that comic so much. If you haven't read Justice League International, it's freaking hilarious. And and maybe it's too funny. Maybe that's not what people would want, but I would say that's what I would do. I mean, yes, it's not the big guns, and the comic wasn't the big guns either, and that was always sort of problematic. But okay, and that would be my first impulse. Probably not what people would want. People want, look, I want to see a Justice League movie. I would try and make a Justice League movie with Jason Momoa, with Gal Gadot, with Superman. I think maybe you wouldn't have Batman in it, and maybe you could get Ben Affleck to come back and play Bruce Wayne, and maybe Bruce Wayne is now financing the Justice League, but he's hung up the cowl. And maybe it's a transitional moment between, say, a Batman Beyond movie. Who knows? I mean, you could do something like that, but I think you're right. I think a new Justice League movie, you bring in new characters. You've got Aquaman. Aquaman has worked as a standalone character. People love Momoa's Aquaman. Gal Gadot, people love Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. It's funny that everyone forgets, but we're getting a Wonder Woman movie in less than a year, Wonder Woman 84, which I can't wait to see. And I would bring in, Green Lantern, absolutely. Hawkman, Atom. There's so many. Shazam, of course. Red Tornado. I always loved Red Tornado. There's a lot of Justice League members. Black Canary. Oliver Queen. I would redo Oliver Queen. Bring in Green Arrow and Green Lantern. Hal Jordan. I mean, there's so many things you could do. But yeah, I think it can be done. But I think that's how I would do this. This one comes from Josh Rozakis is here again. Josh Rozakis is here, obviously a member of the PGS. Hello, Rob, my friend, and hello to my fellow members of the Post-Geek Singularity as well. Razman's Reality here again, and as we know from Razman's Reality, he's got a tough road to go. My mind was just recently completely blown as I've learned that Seth MacFarlane went to CBS a few years back and asked to do Star Trek, and the complete idiot said no. What in the heck were they thinking? Firstly, did you know about this? I did not. And secondly, given the awesomeness that has become the Orville, should we just be grateful that Seth created his own show and great universe with awesome characters? I adore the Orville, but it's how much I do that makes me angry. We could have gotten real Trek by a true fan like us instead of the garage that is Alex Kurtzman and Discovery. The garage? I think you meant to say garbage. The garbage that is Alex Kurtzman and Discovery. Excitement for Picard notwithstanding, and sorry, John, if you're watching, but we all know it's true. As a fan of Trek from my earliest memories and someone who pre-ordered all of the Next Generation Blu-ray sets, including the standalones, to have all the special features that you had the honor of working on, I would love to know what your thoughts on this are, oh Viceroy of Verisimilitude and Master of Fun of Wonder. Well, Josh, I don't necessarily know if Seth MacFarlane taking over Star Trek might have been such a good thing. It could have been. I mean, he so loves the Next Generation, and having interviewed him, as you know, from watching those special features, we had him host our Writers Roundtable, and I interviewed him for actually Roger interviewed him for the Next Generation Blu-rays. He loves Star Trek. I don't know if it'd be such a good fit to make canonical Star Trek. He would have brought his Seth MacFarlane isms into it. I kind of like the fact that we have a new show. We have the Orville, which of course is a shameless Next Generation homage, but I would imagine the third season is really going to take off. And I've enjoyed Orville. I like the fact that we get a new universe and new characters. And even though it's a riff on Next Gen, I think it's cool that we have that. I didn't know that he went and pitched CBS. That's a new one on me. I didn't know that is true. I think that's pretty cool, though, if indeed that is true. I don't know, though. I don't know. I want to thank you for writing in. That is a fine letter that you have written me. This next letter comes from Franz M. a longtime member of this Post-Geek Singularity community. Franz is an avid letter writer, and everything Franz has to say is usually pretty damn interesting. And here's a good letter. So Franz M., take it away. Kathleen Kennedy, the head of Lucasfilm, seems to prefer treating each film in the new trilogy separately rather than as a single narrative. Thus, the first film was led by director J.J. Abrams, but the next film in the trilogy fell to Rian Johnson. Johnson's decision to scrap many of the narrative threads spun by Abrams proved to be one of the most controversial aspects of The Last Jedi. When crafting a film that will, virtually of necessity, have considerable cultural importance, changing leadership willy-nilly with little thought to past entries is a recipe for disaster. The original Star Wars films, for better or for worse, guided by a single vision. For investors, thinking about narrative and vision may be a somewhat esoteric subject, but it matters a great deal when those narratives are a bedrock of incredibly valuable IP. A common argument dismissing concerns about The Last Jedi is the prequels were awful, but the IP survived anyway. Well, the prequels were a bit lame, but in a different way. Their sins were ones of execution, most obviously of dialogue and performance. Everything felt stiff, and the romance thread between Anakin and Padme felt very unconvincing, yet at no point was the core story ever problematic. You could take the core script of the prequels, apply a little polish, reshoot some key scenes, and end up with a perfectly respectable trilogy. I agree with that, actually. You can't really do that with episodes 7 and 8 because the problems run through the scripts at a conceptual level. The plots don't make sense as sequel stories to the first 6 chapters. The single biggest problem is that they retcon the Star Wars narrative universe as one in which good and evil take turns running the galaxy in a never-ending cycle. This is expedient for the setup of Force Awakens and gets embraced as the core of the plot to Last Jedi, yet this does not actually correspond with the Star Wars galaxy at all. Palpatine's rise to power should be seen as the great aberration after thousands of years of peace, safeguarded by the Jedi. Episode 6 was intended to be the point at which the Republic was restored and the aberration is over, yet this is potentially problematic for making a rip-roaring sequel to Return of the Jedi. Any plausible story needs to start out in a restored Republic with new Jedi Order in existence. But where do you go from there? Have a story of a new threat growing within the Republic, Imperial loyalists, a new Sith threat, Dark Jedi? That could work. But the feel would probably be rather similar to the prequels, and the prequels are a slightly peculiar beast. They aren't really about Star Wars very much. Rather, it's an action-packed mystery story about an invisible threat subverting the Republic from within. Quite ambitious and unusual, but very different in feel from the original trilogy. So how do you get back to the feel of the original trilogy? Well, as in the joke about the Irishman giving directions, I wouldn't start from here. So Abrams doesn't. He simply retcons it and hopes you won't really notice or care because you're enjoying the action, the snappy dialogue, and the jokes. The setup for Force Awakens makes very little sense as a continuation of the Star Wars story because it snaps us back to the functional analog of the beginning of Episode 4 with no explanation. The victory in Return of the Jedi was essentially all for nothing. Jakku seems like a worse place to live than anywhere under the Empire, with the possible exception of Alderaan. Would have sucked to have lived there. Luke's Jedi Academy was a failure and he's a broken man. Somehow the Empire lives on with greater weaponry than it ever had before. For the first time in Star Wars, there's no joined-up thinking. This doesn't feel like a story written by people thinking about lore, mechanics, or continuity. This feels like a story written by people who understand that Star Wars looks like on the surface, but none of the internals and complexities. This is a film designed by a focus group. Yes, Lucas's prequels felt clunky, but authentic. The sequels feel snappy and vibrant, but inauthentic. They don't really fit the Star Wars universe, and that's a big problem. Last Jedi is an overcorrection for some of the issues that The Force Awakens had. The Force Awakens felt like it was designed specifically to retread old ground with old tropes. This was arguably the first time the series had ever done this. Jedi obviously gives us a second Death Star, but the plot is very different from the original Star Wars. Last Jedi wants to go so far in the other direction that it throws the baby out with the bathwater. It feels like it's designed to be everything Star Wars fans didn't want, almost for its own sake to make a point. You can call this bold, but you can call it also arrogant and self-indulgent. It would be forgivable if Johnson set up a whole slew of interesting new plot threads and ideas, but he doesn't. In fact, he seems to abandon his iconoclastic mission during the scene aboard Supremacy, where Kylo Ren simply reverts to type, being an oddly motiveless, angry kid, and we get an utterly traditional showdown battle. Then nothing is set up for the final chapter. No interesting questions, no cliffhangers, nothing unresolved, other than the aforementioned question of what on earth Kylo Ren actually wants. Are we rooting for him to die, to be saved? What is at stake? What's motivating me to see episode 9? Finally, Star Wars is a somewhat formulaic franchise. The formula is what makes it successful. It would certainly be bold and subversive for Coca-Cola to start shipping apple juice in their cans, but we should not necessarily applaud them for doing so. And if I were Coca-Cola, I would be very wary of dismissing the complaints of Coke fans as coming from people who don't understand bold visionary moves. Well, Franz, a good letter. I've been reading a lot or watching a lot of things like Mahler's channel, which really delves into these stories, what's wrong with the prequels. I find what's very interesting to me is that, I was showing Elizabeth Empire of Dreams, the Star Wars documentary, and last night, she'd never seen it, and talking about Joseph Conrad and going into the hero's journey. What's interesting to me is that Lucas obviously leaned heavily into Joseph Campbell, and then of course movies like Kurosawa's work with The Hidden Fortress and his samurai movies. And what I found interesting is that rather than delve into that source material, go back in and look at, like, find a samurai movie to base it on, they just riffed on Star Wars. Whereas if you'd gone back to Joseph Campbell's work itself and went back further and did a little bit more work and watched look, we all know that Kurosawa's Ron, is a riff on Shakespeare's King Lear. I think it would have been interesting to do something like that. You could have done so many different interesting ideas by going back to what George Lucas did. Go back to the hero's journey and tell a different kind of a hero's journey. Don't just take Star Wars and then copy Star Wars, because you've got so much rich underlying material that you could go back and look at. I mean, Star Wars is just a riff on samurai movies, really. So go back to a samurai movie, and go back to Joseph Campbell. It would be very, very interesting. But your point's well taken. How do you make a movie about a restored republic that is at all interesting? Well, it's hard to do. But yeah, I think you make a lot of good points. I mean, the funny thing is, everybody loves Star Wars. Nobody wants bad Star Wars. We all want to love Star Wars. And I think the real problem is that we as imagination connoisseurs, we all love Star Wars so much. And we grew up with it. I mean, for me, from 1977 to 1999, well, maybe I'll go back 1970 or 1997. So for 20 years of my life, 2 decades of my life, Star Wars was awesome. I've often said that Return of the Jedi is the most disappointing cinematic experience of my life, which is true. However, that said, the Star Wars trilogy, the original Star Wars trilogy, I might not have been satisfied with Jedi as a whole. It certainly ended well. The Empire, the Emperor, the battle in the Emperor's throne room with Vader, Luke, and the Emperor, it was great. It was great. Come on. You got to love all that. I love everything about it. The music, the battle, the fighting, and what happens at the end. I'll never join you. It's all that's great. So for 20 years, there was never the idea that you could get Star Wars that was bad. I mean, I think that this is something that we have fundamentally been dealing with since, at first we scratched our head at the special editions, the editions that were made, and like, wait a minute, why does Greedo shoot first? That doesn't make any sense. That was the beginning. That was when I'm like, uh-oh. I get why he did it. I mean, these movies are for children, and you can't have Han Solo be a murderer. Well, okay, I get it. But, many cowboys, when you're a kid and you're playing cowboys and Indians or something, and you understand, or a gunfighter is gunning for you, and you're Gary Cooper or something, you understand. But it was weird. And when you saw the prequels, I think watching Phantom Menace, it was like, wait, what? Where did the man who made American Graffiti and who produced Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Indiana Jones movies, what? I mean, I've always said that the prequel trilogy is good Star Wars, but bad movie making. And I think a lot of it had to do with all the virtual sets and the fact that George Lucas is not necessarily a people person. And I think it's a little too convoluted. I mean, I don't want to get into reviewing it now, but the overall story is really interesting. It's just the execution leaves something to be desired. But a good letter, Franz, and some good insights. So thank you for sending that in. Very much appreciated. Roberto Suarez writes,
begun the streaming wars have.
Will we ever see a day when video streaming content becomes platform agnostic and we just choose our preferred service, similar to how it is with music streaming today? Or are we doomed to have to manage and pay for multiple subscriptions in order to watch every platform's exclusive content? Well, I got to say, man, Roberto, it's a good question. Roberto, good name, by the way. It's a good question. I think when it really comes down to it is we're going to be paying for programming. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to jump in and out of streaming services based on their content. The only reason I think, like, I am excited about Disney Plus for the Marvel shows and for Star Wars content. I'm going to admit, I want to see that Jeff Goldblum show. I want Apple Plus because I want to see Ron Moore's show For All Mankind. To me, it's all about content-driven material. As long as there's good material, and like was pointed out earlier in this chat, Netflix is still killing it. They're still, for as much garbage as they put on. And when I say garbage, I mean, I shouldn't say garbage. There's stuff from all over the world that's just crazy content. When something like Criminal comes along, or Stranger Things comes along, or even a lot of the documentary shows that they put out, there's a lot of really great content there. And Netflix is still, they're killing it. Mindhunter, I mean, they're crushing it. I loved Sex Education earlier this year. There's so many good things. And my streaming choices, I am not ever going to be loyal to some brand. I'm not. I am only interested in programs themselves. So as you put it, platform agnostic. That's really interesting. I am only about the shows. And as long as my favorite shows are on, I will be, you know what? Amazon's got, I want to see the upcoming Jack Ryan show. As much as I'm sure I'm going to hate watch every episode, I'm going to watch Watchmen on HBO. There's so much good stuff, but I am all about the shows. I will jump out. We jumped out of HBO when Game of Thrones was over. Jump back in when Watchmen is on. And luckily, if there's a streaming service that puts out interesting content to me personally, I'll stick with it. Amazon I'll always have because I'm an Amazon Prime member. And that's not going to end anytime soon. So, it really, to me, I'm all about the programming. And that's it. All about the programming. So I don't know. What do you guys think? I do not know. I do not know. Let's see what else somebody might have to say. Ian Samuels is here. Well, hello, Ian. Ian is another prolific letter writer, old-time member of this Post-Geek Singularity community. Good to have him back. This is a good letter, too. I like this letter, by the way. So Ian says, forgotten movie legends. One of the most overlooked aspects of filmmaking is the makeup artists. We have had legends including Tom Savini and Rick Baker, but before them was Jack Pierce. Jack Pierce was the makeup legend behind the Universal Monsters, the makeup artist behind Dracula, Frankenstein, Murders in the Rue Morgue, The Mummy, The Black Cat, and many, many others. But this is not just a makeup artist who turned up and slapped on the pancake and blusher. He researched and created the images that would end up on screen. In 1931, when Universal was making Frankenstein, they were nearly halfway through making the film before Boris Karloff appeared on set in full makeup, having spent all that time working with Pierce, which one of the most indelible makeups in Hollywood history, if not the most. Pierce, at the end of his career, was mainly working in TV, including Mr. Ed, the Talking Horse. Many of the legends that make up today, including Rick Baker, named Jack Pierce as one of their main influences. So without Jack Pierce, we may not have the work of Rick Baker. Ian. Well, Ian, thank you. I have a letter that you've written me a long time ago about Conrad Veidt. Actually, it's Conrad Veidt. Why am I saying Veidt? It's Adrian Veidt. It's Conrad Veidt. Conrad Veidt, an actor. But I like these letters. Ian is absolutely correct. And Jack Pierce, an amazing makeup artist. Now, I should go on and say, Rick Baker and Tom Savini, of course, and of course Dick Smith, who Rick Baker learned from. A lot of the great makeup artists who've been responsible for everything from Dustin Hoffman aging and David Bowie aging. Dick Smith did those aging makeups and Little Big Man and The Hunger, respectively. Rick Baker doing the transformation effects in American Werewolf in London that won him the first special makeup effect Academy Award back in 1981 at the 82 Oscars. I mean, makeup artists, they never get enough credit. And I'll tell you something. If any of you ever get to produce movies, let me just tell you right now, in addition to food, a lot of people forget. Whenever I'm asked, whenever I speak in colleges or film classes, which I do, by the way, if you're interested, contact me. I always surprise people, but I'm like, okay, here's what you need to remember. Some of the first things that you have to make sure of, where you're not going to skimp, is on food, on your meals, and on your crafty, and on your makeup artist, especially if you have women in your cast. I cannot stress more the importance of great makeup people. Great makeup people are not just good with makeup. They are, make no mistake, they are therapists. You confide in them. They are the first people your actors see in the morning and the last people they see at night. And let me tell you, having great makeup people is one of the most important things as a filmmaker or as a producer you can do, because everybody wants to look, actresses want to look great, actors want to look great. And you know what? A great makeup artist, you cannot ever downplay the importance of great makeup people on a movie set. A lot of people forget that, but it's absolutely true. So indeed, it's great to honor the great Jack Pierce. I mean, think about it. I mean, Wolfman, The Mummy. I don't know if he worked on all those things, but all the Universal monsters. I don't know if he did Creature from the Black Lagoon, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did. But my God, what a legacy. And Ian, I want to thank you for bringing that up. The Post-Geek Singularity community should never be forgotten, because there is a lot of great ones. This letter comes from Martin Lawrence. Greetings and salutations, Rob. I was perusing Amazon UK pre-orders when I noticed this, something that just screamed, Robert Meyer Burnett needs this in his life. This could be bigger than Apocalypse Now, for heaven's sake. On November 25th for limited release, there is a huge Blu-ray box set of Godzilla movies from 1954 to 1975. That would be the Showa era. 15 movies in all with high-def transfers. This is awesome news, and I had to get on my keyboard to make sure you are aware of this. So excited for this release. I'm hoping the Lawrence spacecraft is docking near the Burnett space station on this one. Yours sincerely, Martin Lawrence. Well, Mr. Lawrence, would it surprise you to know that set is coming out from my beloved Criterion? The Criterion Collection is putting out 15 Godzilla movies, the Showa-era Godzilla films, that entire continuity, including my beloved Godzilla versus Monster Zero, or Godzilla versus the Astro Monster, my favorite. I can't wait. It's coming in a beautiful box set, lavishly illustrated. It comes out here in October. Can't wait. And by the way, I just posted on the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, I posted yesterday, the trailer that Criterion released for this release. Gotta have it. It's essential. I'll put it right next to my Criterion Zatoichi box set, because the design that Criterion just kills it. How can you not want all of those Godzilla movies in your possession? You have to. I know I do. So thanks for you and I definitely park our shuttlecraft in the same shuttle bay, which is phenomenal. So yes, how great is that? I'm very excited. So yeah. Mark C is back. I think the streaming services that falter will combine and give us one channel. Hopefully we get to keep it to no more than 5. Well, Mark, you bring up a great point. The question is, how many streaming services are people going to pay for? Eventually, you're going to get right back up to the same amount of money you're paying for cable, and it really is going to come. I think maybe 5. You're probably right about that. People are going to start bundling. But you know what? The fact is, I knew this was going to happen. Everybody that owns content is going to have their own streaming service and sell direct, basically, rather than, and they want to get rid of physical media for the same reason. That way, the studios maintain ownership of their programming. You don't have it, and I think that's where they want it. But yeah, everybody's going to be like, wait, how much am I paying? And then when people, if you think about it, if you start, let's just say everybody's $10 or $15, 5, that's a lot of money. Disney Plus, at least at launch, is very reasonable. I know that I'm not going to be ever getting rid of Disney Plus. Netflix, I can't see getting rid of anytime soon, as long as they keep up with the great programming. Amazon Prime, I love. For what they've got coming down the pike, and what they've already got out there. I don't know about Universal yet. I don't know about the Peacock network. Who knows? we'll see. But yeah, it might combine. It might have to. I don't know. But it's interesting that the studios are now the brand, which is interesting. Razman's Reality says, "You're welcome, sir." And yes, it is true. Mark Jackson, who plays Isaac on the Orville, mentioned it in a recent interview. That's interesting. I didn't know that. I could definitely see that. I'm sure a lot of people went to CBS to pitch Star Trek shows. Mark Chure says, the makeup on Robert Downey Jr. for the Avengers in 4K is visible, especially his eyeliner. Yeah, that's one of the downfalls. I'm not going to call it downfall, but one of the problems with 4K is it's so good that it is understood by many different. Here's something interesting. So when you're making movies, obviously everything is fake. I worked in the art department, and one of the things that would amaze me when I worked in the art department, when I worked on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and even when I've seen any art department, I've done other art department work and other projects. When I was at Full Moon, I did art department work or scenic work. I was always amazed, like, if somebody wanted to paint, the scenic department can paint a wall and make it look like concrete or make it look like wood. It's amazing what the scenic department can do. There are tricks that were developed over the decades in Hollywood to create the illusion of things because they understood that if the camera wasn't up close or resolution issues and things like that, you could get away with. They're just tricks. And makeup is one of the big things. How to create shadings on faces and all the different things that you can do with whether it's makeup or paint. I mean, the things that you can create, amazing. But as our resolutions have gotten better, these things are much more painfully obvious. Stunt people in the original Star Trek, for instance. And it is, Mark, you're absolutely right. I mean, makeup is, you can see it, but we just have to look beyond it. We just have to look beyond it because that is a downside of getting better resolution. We're all aware of movie magic now, but it doesn't bother me that much. But you're absolutely correct. It is still out there. Yeah. Here is this is a great letter. It's a long letter, but it's a good letter. I like this letter a lot. This comes from, it's either Jason Manwiller or Manwiller. Let's say Jason Manwiller. He's written letters before. Hey, Rob, hope you're doing well. I've been trying to get caught up on the past few shows. I'm almost there. I wanted to let you know that I finally signed up and I'm now a Post-Geek Singularity hero. Well, thank you, sir. What he's talking about is signing up on the website at the Burnettwork.net. You can sign up there to support the channel and basically keep the website going. I will be submitting to you my form for a viewer topic so we can finally set that up. It's been about a month since I last submitted a letter to you, and so I wanted to finally send you my letter on Disney live-action remakes. I've talked about sending you this letter for a while now, so I hope you enjoy. Before diving into the topic at hand, I wanted to give our community some insight into my history with the Walt Disney Company to give my point of view some credibility. I grew up as what is lovingly referred to as a Disnerd. Simply put, a Disney nerd. A Disnerd. I've never heard that. Disnerd. The first movie I ever saw was 1967's The Jungle Book. This movie is very important to me as not only was it the first movie I ever saw, but it was the last film that my idol Walt Disney personally worked on. And it's my dad's favorite Disney film. This film began my journey into discovering the entire library that the animation studio had released, along with their live-action films. Disney animation is where my love of films and animation come from, and so I started my lifelong dream of wanting to be an animator. I've studied animation and movie making most of my life and have a profound respect for those who are in the field. While I love various types of movies, there's something about the way the Disney Animation Studio crafts their films that hooks me. In fact, I'd say they're rather ingenious. It's a simple concept at its core. Adapt classic fairy tale stories with animation and top it off with a hint of a musical, and you create a Disney animated film. The irony that I love these movies so much is hilarious because I hate musicals. But with these films, I don't mind at all. I love them. In a previous letter about the Walter Mosley situation, I mentioned that I worked for the Walt Disney Company for over 8 years. I think that gives me some credibility when discussing their films, as I know a great deal about the history of their company and filmography. For those who are curious what I did, I worked at the Disney Store and even in the theme parks at Walt Disney World at Epcot. While at Disney Store, we did an annual company-wide trivia contest. We could compete in-store and move on accordingly to regionals, district, and then nationals. They brought this back during the middle of my time there, but I won consecutively for 4 straight years in my region, and I was in the top 3 of my district each year. I regrettably never made it to nationals, but this is a hard task to accomplish. You have to know about company history, films, theme parks, Marvel, Star Wars products, and even company policies. This is a true test of your knowledge of the Walt Disney Company, so the fact that I made it that far each year while I was competing makes me very proud of my knowledge base. So now on to my letter. So most viewers think the modern Disney live-action remakes started with Maleficent beginning in 2014. However, they would be wrong. This current slate of live-action remakes based upon Disney classic animated films began with 2010's Alice in Wonderland, directed by Tim Burton. The film is a remake of the 1951 animated classic Alice in Wonderland. While the film has elements of the classic story along with elements of the Disney animated film in it, the film was a good, honest effort, but I didn't think it was that bad overall, but it's not the best. I prefer the original animated film to its counterpart. The film received a sequel released in 2016, Alice Through the Looking Glass, named after the classic novel. This film came and went, and I honestly did not enjoy this film at all. I found it wasn't really needed to be made to begin with. The only thing I can say about these movies is they look okay visually, but from a story standpoint, they're rather mediocre. Maleficent, released in 2014, is a different spin on the tale of Sleeping Beauty told from the perspective of Maleficent. I hated this movie so much. To be fair, though, I'm not a fan of Sleeping Beauty, so that may play into this with my own personal bias. Angelina is a goddess, and I can't say anything bad about her in the film. I just didn't enjoy the story. Now we take a look at Cinderella, directed by Kenneth Branagh, who also did Thor. It's an adaptation of Disney's 1950 animated classic, Cinderella. Now, this movie is incredible. I loved it too. The animated classic is one of Disney's best, and this live-action adaptation may possibly be better. Woo! This movie is the Thor of these live-action adaptations. What I mean by that is it's underrated and directed by Kenneth Branagh. Lily James is perfection as Cinderella, and what can I say about Cate Blanchett that hasn't been said? Her portrayal of Lady Tremaine is on point and provides a more layered look at Lady Tremaine compared to her animated counterpart, who plays it one note. Now we move right along to my personal favorite of these live-action adaptations. No surprise there, sir. The Jungle Book. Directed by Jon Favreau and released in 2016, it's an adaptation of the film I mentioned earlier, the 1967 animated film. While the environment that Favreau crafted is incredible, what I love most about this movie is how perfectly cast this movie is. Sir Ben Kingsley, Lupita Nyong'o, Scarlett Johansson, Christopher Walken, Idris Elba, and even Bill Murray. This movie has everything. Now, I will say that I prefer the original voice of Baloo, Phil Harris, over Bill Murray. I prefer the original songs from the animated film over the live-action adaptation, and I don't think Murray is better than Harris. Otherwise, I can't complain about this movie, and I think it is the gold standard for these Disney live-action adaptations. Moving on to something more controversial, Beauty and the Beast, released in 2017, based on the classic and iconic 1991 animated film of the same name. I'm sure I'll get some hate for this, but I absolutely hated this adaptation. I'm not going to apologize for it either. Hey, man, they made a hot toy of Emma Watson. I don't think this movie was properly cast in the same way that The Jungle Book was. Emma Watson was not a good fit for Belle. Dan Stevens was okay as the Beast, and Luke Evans was respectable, to put it nicely, but overall, I did not like this cast. This film is not as solid as its animated counterpart, but honestly, how could it be? Its animated counterpart was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars in '92. If it wasn't clear, I prefer the animated classic to the sad attempt at adaptation. Christopher Robin was a nice, fresh take on the Winnie the Pooh story. It was a smaller film. The concept of Christopher Robin growing up and having a family of his own and rekindling his friendship with Winnie the Pooh was a charming tale. Dumbo was a train wreck of a film. I had high hopes for this movie because I love the classic 1941 animated film. This film let me down so much. I'm not even going to get into The Lion King at all. If you want to talk about a letdown, then this is the definition of one. There isn't much I can say that hasn't already been said. But yes, this film looks gorgeous, but you can't animate it. The lions are stiff and don't have expressions. The animated film is superior as opposed to this film. The cast is not bad, but while this film looks stunning, that's about it. Finally brings us to Aladdin. I must admit that I have not seen this film yet. I do not care how much money this movie's made. I do not know if I can bring myself to watch it. Aladdin is my favorite Disney animated film, and the previews for this live-action adaptation does not reflect the film I love. I've seen numerous reviews, and they seem to echo my sentiment. Maybe one day I will watch it, but for now, I just can't do it. In terms of what's coming up, Mulan does look good. The Lady and the Tramp film seems like a cute adaptation for the streaming service, and Maleficent, Mistress of Evil seems intriguing. Overall, I would say these adaptations have not been good and have been all over the place. I wish, you mean like Star Wars? I wish Disney would get back to creating classic animated films and develop new live-action films, not these animated adaptations. I don't feel they are needed and are easy money grabs. Sorry for the rant, Rob, but I promised this for a long time and I wanted to be thorough. What are your thoughts on the live-action adaptations? As always, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Jason Manweiler. Well, Jason, first of all, thank you for that letter. That was great. It was great to hear from somebody new about something we don't necessarily. I mean, you're new. You're not that new. You've been here, but I like reading something. Somebody that's impassioned about Disney. I think it's great. What do I think about the Disney? You know, like you, I loved Cinderella. You know, I love that they got Kenneth Branagh to do it. Bill Condon directed Beauty and the Beast, I think. You know, as long as they can bring something new to the party, and I thought Cinderella did. It was certainly the classic story, but there was an honest new spin on it. It seemed like it was its own thing, and I enjoyed that. I mean, the actors were obviously great. It strayed. The overall story was pretty much the same, but there was nuances that were different, and I really feel that Kenneth Branagh classed up the joint. I mean, he brought his encyclopedic knowledge of Shakespeare and his longtime presence on the London stage. There was just something about it and Lily James, and it was great. But I think, like you said, they're all hit and miss. I love the Jungle Book. I really love the Jungle Book. I thought it was amazing. I thought conceptually, The Lion King from a standpoint that they went photoreal, which is sort of odd because whenever you're dealing with walking, talking animals, anthropomorphized animals that still look like animals, to go then photorealistic and ground, it's weird because if you go back and you watch like the Hakuna Matata scene and the fact that it's just kind of boring, I mean, I really wish that they would have gone more stylized. You could have had photorealistic animals and gone a little bit more over the top and brought those animated facial expressions if you wanted to. But then again, that would have shattered the verisimilitude they're going for. But the fact is, once animals are talking, the verisimilitude's sort of out the window. So maybe more of a photorealistic yet more animated approach to the animals, more stylization, more I don't know. But again, it's hit and miss. Look, they do it because it keeps the studio afloat. I understand, but I worry about the future of Disney because they're going to run out. You know, what are we going to get now? The live action Aristocats? Or maybe have they done that already? I mean, I don't know. The live action Black Cauldron, although that might be kind of cool. It's just, what are you going to do when you run out? Thank God they've got new animated properties like Frozen and Frozen 2. Frozen 2 looks really good. Are they going to do live action adaptations of Toy Story? I mean, God, hope not. I hope not. Ugh. But they've got to come up with new products. I mean, recycling, I get why they're doing it, but they're going to run out of things to recycle. It's always better. You know, it's harder to do for a risk-averse company. Coming up with brand new IP and new animated things it's a difficult proposition. It is really, really, really hard to do. Well, ladies and gentlemen, man, I got to tell you, this has been a long chat. I'm gonna bring an end to this chat because I am tired and I need to eat something. I'm starving. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel. Please let me ask you, if you like these chats, please hit like, subscribe to them. It always helps the YouTube analytics. I want to thank my moderators, the in absentia, Mike Bodden, who's traveling. I want to thank Terry, obviously the sheriff of Nottingham, whom we love, Detective Jim. Detective Jim is here, and of course, when he can, Greg Smith, for their great moderating job. If Greg Smith's not single-handedly building a snowspeeder model or a house that somebody can live in, yes, he's building a 1-to-1 scale snowspeeder. I want to thank them for being great moderators and making this place fun to hang out in. So thank you for that. And I also want to thank everybody for supporting the channel through super chats, through going and signing up at the website, theburnettwork.net. Check it out. Most of the letters I've read, some of them aren't up yet because Mike has been traveling, but they'll all be up there. Go to the website. There's over 800 pieces of content, including letters and 3-word. If you've got a 3-word movie review, I like reading those. Go put those up. And everything else, theburnettwork.net is taken off. I love seeing when people go to the website. It's great. A lot of traffic there. It goes up all the time. And I want to just thank you for being you. And thanks for listening to me pontificate and go on and on and on. And I will see you tomorrow. And I will say this, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I bring this, Robservations number 232. Robservation, the show about something. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, and of course, the Mr. Rogers of Existentialism, which I think is great. These are all names that people hung on me. So I want to thank you all, and thanks for going on these wacky journeys with me. We'll continue to see where we wind up. We live in heady times, my friends. So why can't you have a better day?